Hey there! Welcome to this beginner-level Blazor course where you're going to learn how to build a CRUD-style Blazor application completely from scratch and step-by-step. My name is Julio Casal. I'm a software engineer with many years building different kinds of .NET applications, and I'm the founder of .NET where I help .NET developers build cloud-ready .NET systems at scale. By the end of this course, you will have a basic CRUD-style Blazor single-page application built entirely with C#, HTML, and CSS that will allow users to manage a simple game catalog from a modern, interactive, and friendly user interface. Let's start. In order to take this course, you should have some basic knowledge of C#, Java, or a similar object-oriented language. You should also have some experience with HTML and CSS. However, this is a beginner-level course, so you don't have to be an expert on any of these topics since we write every line of code from scratch and everything we do is explained in detail. In fact, if you already know the basics of Blazor and you are looking for intermediate or advanced level topics, this is not the course for you since we will be covering only the most essential components and features that will give you a great start with this amazing platform. Before moving on to the software prerequisites, let me give you a quick preview of the single-page application that you will build in this course. So I got the finished version of this application running in my box, and it is running in localhost port 5259, so let's go ahead and load it. And this is known as a Blazor WebAssembly application, and it represents the game catalog section of a fictional game store. And this application was built with nothing more than C#, HTML, and a little bit of CSS. Now, as you can see in the home page of the application, what we get is what is known as the game catalog, right? And so it's just a simple list of games, each of them featuring an ID, a name, the genre, a price, and the release date. And if you wanted to add a brand new game into this list, all you have to do is just to click on this new game button over here. Just click on new game, and that takes us to a form where you can enter all the details for this brand new game. Now, one thing to notice about this form is that it already features what is known as client-side validation. So if I wanted to just go ahead and save the form as it is right now, just click on save. That is going to go ahead and prompt the user to enter all of the required details, right? So like in this case, we have to enter name and genre, and the price is also required, and it has to be in a valid range. So to satisfy this, I mean, you cannot really move forward without satisfying the validations. So I'll have to enter a game. So let's enter Forza Horizon 5, let's say, and let's pick a genre. The genre is going to be racing. And notice how the validations start going away as I enter valid information. And for the price, you want to enter an actual valid range. So it cannot be a negative number, like this is not going to work. Also 105 is not going to work because it has to be at least 100, or at much 100. And so what you want to do is just enter, let's say 59.99, and that's going to satisfy the validation. And then for the release date, you can either pick a date from this date selector, as you can see here. You can pick a date over there, or you can just enter the date by typing in there, like I'm going to do right now. It's going to be November 5, 2021, let's say. And when you're ready, you can go ahead and just click on this button here, save, to go ahead and save the brand new game. And as you can see, it shows up right here at the bottom, right? That's our new game. Now, just like you can create a game, you can also go ahead and edit any of these games. So for instance, let's say that I'm going to edit Street Fighter 2. I'm going to change the title and perhaps change the price because it is on sale. So I'm going to click on this edit button over here. I'm going to click on edit. And that's going to take me back into the same form, but this time it is in edit mode, right? The same form in edit mode. So what I can do now is just, let's say, change the game, the name. So it's going to be Street Fighter 2 Turbo, right? And then since it is on sale, let's say this is it's going to be only $9.99. That's going to be fairly cheap. And then you can go ahead and click on save again, and that's going to take the effect of having the modified game right here. As you can see, it has modified the values. And finally, of course, you can also delete any of the records over here. And so the delete experience looks like this. So you just select the game that you want to delete. Let's say we want to delete Minecraft. So all you have to do is just click on this X button just next to the game. So click on that. That's going to pop up this nice dialog over here. You can say cancel if you don't really want to delete the game, or you can actually go ahead and say delete, after which the game will be deleted. As you can see, it is no longer here in the list. So yeah, so that's the application that we're going to build across this course. And next, let's talk about the software prerequisites that you will need in your box to get started. In terms of the software prerequisites for this course, all the tools that you'll use are cross-platform, so you can use any computer with Mac OS, Windows, or Linux as the operating system. You will also need to download and install the following: the .NET Software Development Kit, or SDK, which includes everything needed to build and run .NET applications, and Visual Studio Code, a lightweight but powerful source code editor that you will use to write, build, and debug your code. You could also use any other code editor if you prefer, but VS Code is your best choice to follow along step by step. Please make sure that you download and install both in your box using the URLs on screen before starting the coding part of the course. So, what is ASP.NET Core? Well, in simple terms, ASP.NET Core is a popular web development framework for building web apps on the .NET platform. ASP stands for Active Server Pages, which was Microsoft's first server-side scripting language and engine for dynamic web pages, and was released in December 1996. It was superseded by ASP.NET in January 2002 with the first version of the .NET framework, and several years later, around 2016, it was superseded again by ASP.NET Core, where Core mainly hints to the cross-platform capability of this web framework. Now, it would be good to also briefly mention what is the .NET platform and how it relates to ASP.NET Core. .NET is a free, cross-platform, open-source development platform for building many types of applications that go from apps for Windows desktops to web applications, cloud applications, mobile applications, games, apps for Internet of Things, and even apps designed for artificial intelligence scenarios. .NET is a unified platform that serves the needs of all app types to make it easy to reuse code across all of your apps. Now, in this course, you will focus only on ASP.NET Core, which stands for the web type of applications that you can create with the .NET platform. Now, how do you create ASP.NET Core applications? Well, you got to use a programming language, but that language is not really .NET or even ASP.NET Core. You get to choose between 3 languages to create your ASP.NET Core apps, which are C#, F#, and Visual Basic. But in this course, we will be using the most popular one, which is C#. When you install the .NET Software Development Kit, or SDK, you get access not just to these languages, but also to a series of tools that make it very easy to get started with the platform, even before choosing a code editor or IDE. You also get access to a Microsoft and community-supported set of libraries and packages that can quickly expand the functionalities of your app so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many ways to deploy ASP.NET Core apps to make them available to your users, that go from simple Xcopy deployments to fully Dockerized deployments ready for the cloud. Your ASP.NET Core apps are cross-platform, meaning that the same code that you write once can run on Mac OS, Linux, and Windows. And it's all open source on GitHub. Along with .NET Core, it has thousands of contributions by hundreds of developers and companies, making it one of the fastest growing and loved projects on GitHub. We talked about the different kinds of applications that you can create with the .NET platform, but even with ASP.NET Core, there are also a few types of applications that you can create. On one side, you can create very rich, dynamic, and interactive web UIs or frontends with the extensive UI framework included in ASP.NET Core. But on the other side, you can also create many kinds of secure and powerful backend services that can provide data to the web UI or take care of long-running or compute-intensive scenarios that don't need any user interaction. Now, when you create web UIs with ASP.NET Core, you have the choice to create either server-rendered or client-rendered UIs. A server-rendered UI dynamically generates the HTML and CSS of the pages on the server in response to browser requests, so when the page arrives to the browser, it is ready to display. To create this type of apps, you can choose either ASP.NET's MVC framework, which uses the model view controller pattern, or the Razor Pages framework, which follows a page-based model. A client-rendered UI dynamically renders the UI elements on the client, directly updating the page you see in your browser as necessary. These type of UIs are also called single-page applications, or SPAs, since usually there's only one single page that is continuously updated as you interact with the site. ASP.NET Core includes a complete UI framework known as Blazor for building this type of application with C#, HTML, and CSS. There are also several choices for building backend services. Web application programming interfaces, or web APIs, are the most common form of backend services, given how easy it is to use them to query or send data from and to backend servers using the HTTP protocol. But you can also create real-time applications via SignalR to push content directly from the server to the client, or gRPC apps, which allow for high-performance remote procedure calls between clients and services, or even background worker services, which can perform tasks that usually require no user input, like long-running or compute-intensive operations, or even tasks that start based on some sort of external event. You could also create microservices, which are business-aligned, loosely coupled services that small and focused teams can build and deploy independently using one or more of the available backend service technologies I just mentioned. Sadly, we can't cover all of this in a single course, so in this video, the focus will be on building a client-rendered web UI using Blazor. If you're also interested in building backend services, please check out my site where I offer other courses that cover that side of the spectrum. So what is Blazor? Blazor is a framework for building interactive client-side web UI with .NET. This means that instead of using JavaScript to create a rich and interactive UI, which is a more traditional approach, you can instead use C# in combination with HTML and CSS. Now, you can host your Blazor applications either in the server via an ASP.NET Core application or in the client using a technology known as WebAssembly. In this course, we will focus on the client-side option, so it will be good to understand what is WebAssembly. In simple terms, WebAssembly is a web technology that allows code written in different languages to run in a browser. That means that you can code your application in languages like C++, Go, C#, and many others, compile it into WebAssembly format, and then that same application can run in all modern browsers without any additional plugins. So, thanks to WebAssembly, your C# code can access the full functionality of the browser. That takes us to Blazor WebAssembly, which is a single-page application framework for building interactive client-side web apps with .NET. A single-page application, or SPA, is a kind of web application that dynamically rewrites a single web page in response to user actions, and is something that you can also create with JavaScript-based web UI frameworks like Angular, React, and Vue. Now, with Blazor WebAssembly, you start by creating reusable components using a mix of C# and HTML. These are commonly known as Razor components, and your Blazor application will likely be composed of many of them. Then, you compile these components into a .NET DLL, which is known as an assembly in the .NET world, along with all the required assemblies that ship with .NET. After that, you take all these assemblies and place them in a web server, which could be either your local box, a server in your local network, or a web server in the cloud. When you navigate to the web server, all the required Blazor components will be downloaded to your browser. This includes the WebAssembly implementation of Blazor, all the required .NET assemblies, and the assemblies that contain all your Razor components. Blazor WebAssembly bootstraps the .NET runtime, loads your assemblies, and then your app starts manipulating the page via the browser's document object model, or DOM. Let's now get our hands dirty by building our game store Blazor client. So here we are in a brand new instance of Visual Studio Code, and before we start doing the actual coding, what I like to do is to just set a few settings in Visual Studio Code so that it is easier to format the code that we will be writing. And to do that, what we're going to do is go into File, and then Preferences, and then Settings. And here we're going to be looking for just 3 settings. Let's type Place Open Brace, and that's going to show up these 4 settings here. And what you want to do is to click on these first 2, the one that says place open brace on new line for control blocks and place open brace on new line for functions. So this is just going to modify the default location of the curly braces anytime you write like an if-else statement, or if you create a new function, the opening curly brace just go into the next line, which is a nice formatting, I think. And then the next setting that we're going to modify is format on save. Okay, it's the first one over here. You want to tick this one, and this is just so that anytime you save the file, it is going to automatically format the file for you. So that's it in terms of Visual Studio Code settings, and we're just going to go ahead and close this. And the next thing we're going to do is to install a few extensions that are going to make our Blazor and C# coding experience much better in VS Code. So what we're going to do is go into the extensions view, and you can get there by going into this icon over here. This is the extensions view, so just click on that one, and here you're going to see any extension that you have already installed. In my case, I only have one extension, which is a VS Code icons extension. All this one does is it gives much better coloring to the files that we're going to see in the Explorer view. So this is optional. Feel free to install it if you want to, but it's not really required for this course. Now, what I'm going to be looking for is for one extension that is called Blazor WASM for Blazor WebAssembly. Right, so you just type that one, you're going to find this one extension here. It's Microsoft ASP.NET Core Razor VS Code Blazor WASM debugging extension. And so this is the one that's going to enable a bunch of nice debugging features for Blazor within VS Code. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on install. And this extension is going to install not just the Blazor extension, but also the C# extension. So I'm just going to clear this now. You're going to see that now we have a few other extensions. So we have the Blazor extension over here. We also have the C# extension. Let me expand this for a bit. right there. The C# extension is the one that provides all the C# productivity features inside Visual Studio Code. So you have to make sure that you have this one installed, and it came with the Blazor extension. And then there's also this other extension here that supports the other ones. There's one more extension that I would recommend that you also install, which is called actually C# extensions. And then there's going to be a few variants of this one. The one that you want to install is this one here, right here, from Just Creative, right? So this is the one that is going to allow to give us a bunch of more additional context menus, specifically to create C# files inside Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to go ahead and install this one here. Okay, so that's installed. And now we are pretty much done with the configuration of our development environment. So now it is time to create our Blazor client. And to do that, first we're going to define what is going to be the location in my box, in this case, where we're going to be creating these files. So let's go into File and Open Folder. And here I'm going to switch into my D projects directory. You can choose really any directory in your box. I'm going to be choosing this one here for our purposes. And right here, I'm going to create one folder that I'm going to be calling Game Store. Okay, because this is fictional game story scenario. So this is where we're going to be having our projects. So you're going to click on Select Folder right there. So this opens Visual Studio Code in the context of that one folder. And what we want to do now is to create our Blazor client using the .NET CLI. And in order to do that, we're going to be using the integrated terminal of Visual Studio Code. So for that, let me first collapse this pane over here. And to open the terminal, you can go into View and then Terminal. And that's going to open the terminal in the context of the folder where we are right now, which is our Game Store folder. Now, a couple of shortcuts to open this terminal are, if I just close this for a moment, are Ctrl-tilde, at least Windows, you can do Ctrl-tilde, or you can also do Ctrl-J to open the terminal very quickly. Now, what I also want to do here is just to expand this terminal, and you can do that by using this icon right here. You can use that just to expand the terminal. And what I'd like to do now is to first verify that we do have the .NET CLI installed. And to do that, all you have to do is just type .NET-info, and that's going to show all the information about your version of the .NET SDK. As you can see, I am using version 7.0.102 of the .NET SDK. Now, you don't have to have exactly this version of the .NET SDK, but I will ask you to please stick to .NET 7 at least, because the project templates that we're going to be using for creating the projects are going to include files generated by the .NET 7 SDK. Other versions of the SDK may not have the same files that we're going to be seeing across this course, so that make it a bit more challenging to follow along. So please stick to .NET 7 SDK for this course. So now we know that we have the CLI installed. Let me clear the screen, and now we can go ahead and create our project. So to do that, all you have to do is just say .NET new, and then you can use first the option list to get a full list of all of the included project templates. So as you can see, it's kind of a big list over here that reveals all the types of projects that you can create with the .NET SDK. Like I mentioned, there are many different projects that you can create, but in our case, we are mostly interested in the Blazor WebAssembly app template right here. So this is the one that allows you to create a single page application using Blazor WebAssembly. Okay, so that's the one that we're going to be using. So let me clean the screen again. Now what we can do is just say .NET new Blazor WASM, and then you want to use -n to specify the name of the project to create. So that's going to be GameStore.client. Okay, hit enter, and now we'll go ahead and create our project. And so if we open the Explorer view now by using this view over here, Explorer, you're going to see that now we have a folder here with a bunch of files. And we'll talk about these files in a second. But before doing that, what we can do right away is just to verify that we can actually run a Blazor application in our box. And since this template generated already a project for us with a little bit of functionality, we can just verify that very quick. So what we can do now is, and I'll just clean this, we're going to switch into the GameStore.client directory. And now we can go ahead and do a couple of things. First thing would be to build the application, so to produce the output of this application, which you can do with the .NET CLI by just typing .NET build. So I will go ahead and produce an output for an application. And now that you have that, you can go ahead and just type .NET run. Of course, you could also just go ahead and just type .NET run if you wanted to. So that will go ahead and build and then run the application. And so it's always good to just verify that things are building properly. Now, as the output of this .NET run execution, you can see that we have a line here this one here, that clearly tells us what is the URL of the site that is running now in our box. As you can see, in my case, that would be HTTP localhost in port 5259, but that's a random port. So in your case, it's going to be different, so that's fine. But it's good to know that this is where the application is running. And in fact, we can now just go ahead and copy this URL, and you can also just click on it if you wanted to. But we can copy that and we can go ahead into a browser. So here I have my browser, and you can just paste that in the navigation bar, hit enter, and here you're going to see your initial Blazor application. So this layout that you can see here is kind of the default layout that every Blazor application gets. And so it's fairly simple. So you can see there's a central content page over here with just a simple hello world, a brief survey, and then we do have a left navigation bar on the left side. There's also kind of a top bar over here at the top. And if you go on the left side, there's a little counter element here that you can just click here. And this is doing accounting in the client side, directly in the client. So there's no server side here. There's also this fetch data, a section that shows you how to load data from some little JSON file that's included in the project template, but it's not doing really any server side. But this just shows you that the application is up and running. It doesn't just not spend too much time on this. We just know that the application is running, which is great. And we can also use this here to describe a little bit the files that have been created for this project. So let me collapse this a little bit. We're going to minimize a little bit this terminal. I'm actually going to close here. This is not going to stop the application, it's just closing the terminal. So the application just keeps running, which is okay. But what we want to do is just explore very quickly the files that have been generated for this project, because it's good to understand what you're going to be working with. We're not going to be looking in detail or even into every single file here, but these files are important. So it's good for you to understand what's going on. And so the first file we're going to take a look at is this gamestore.client.csproc here. This is what's called the project file. So every .NET application has a project file, and the project file defines a few important things. The first thing at the top here is going to define the type of application that you're working with. In this case, it clearly says that this is a Blazor WebAssembly application. It's a type of application that we want to work with, but it could be different depending on the type of application that you're creating. And the other important part is going to be this one here, which is the target framework. So this defines what is the set of APIs of .NET that you're going to have access to. Since this one here says .NET 7.0, it means that this targets the APIs included in the .NET 7 SDK and runtime. That is what, and since we're using the .NET 7 SDK, that's where you got this target framework here. And then the other important thing here is going to be there's a list of package references. These are external components that are included now in our project. And in this case, it's just a couple of components for being able to develop WebAssembly applications, Blazor WebAssembly applications in your box. So that is the project file. One important thing to understand here is where is the root, the web root of our application. Since this is a web application, that has to be a web root. And that's actually in this www root folder over here, which as you can see, it looks really like a very standard and simple website over here, which in fact has an index page, an index as HTML, which is a very common page to have in your website, right? And this page has the expected a head element over here. It also has a body element over here, as you can see. And then of course, in the head, it is referencing a few style sheets, CSS files that define styles for the application, right? And those CSS are going to be located on the left side over here in this CSS folder. You can see that there's an app CSS for the CSS for the application. And there's also CSS for Bootstrap, which is a layout framework that we're going to be talking about later on. And there's also this OpenIconic other framework for fonts that we're also going to be using later on. So there's this basic CSS included here. And then looking at the body of this index page, we do have a couple of sections here. But a very important section here is going to be this div here that has the app ID. And this is going to be the section where we're going to be rendering and re-rendering the different Razor components, the dynamic Razor components that change based on the interactions that the user has with the site. Remember that we said that this is going to be a single page application. And by single page, we really mean it. There's just one page in this application, and that is the index page, this one that we are right now. But it is dynamic, so things are going to be changing, and they are going to be changing within this app element over here. And so there's also another component here. This is the error UI. This is just a section for displaying errors from Blazor. But then there's this also very important element down here, which is the blazor.webassembly.js. This is a JavaScript file whose purpose is to actually load Blazor into the browser, right? So this is the JavaScript file, and that's included already with the framework. But this is the file that downloads the Blazor implementation of .NET into the browser. When the application loads, it loads the .NET assemblies, it loads your own assemblies and components, and that's what brings to life the whole Blazor application, right? Now we're talking about Blazor Razor components here, but where are those components actually? So if you go on the left side, let's go into the pages folder here. So pages is where you typically define these Razor components. As you can see, we do have components that correspond to the UI, right? So if you see the UI here, we do have a section, a home section, counter, and fetch data. And so as you see the pages, we do have counter, fetch data, and an index.razor. So let's look at index.razor over here. By the way, yeah, you may get this prompt over here now that it showed up. So this is VS Code detecting that we're going to be working with C# code here. So it is asking us to add additional files to make the experience much better. So we're just going to go ahead and click on yes on this dialog. So click yes, and that's going to generate a .vs Code folder. We're going to be talking about that one in a moment, right? But whenever you see that file, that could happen when you open a Razor file or a C# file. So make sure that you click yes, so that you can get this .vs Code folder over there. And so going back to index.razor, this page here represents of course, the central and main element that we're going to see in this page here, right? So it says, hello world, welcome to your new app, and there's this survey link over here. So that is exactly the content that you can see over here. But notice that this looks like HTML, but it's not exactly HTML. It's called the Razor syntax. And this is HTML combined with Razor components, or even with C#. You can also include in this page here. So notice that this is a normal H1, so that's expected in HTML. But you also have this page title element here, which is not just HTML. This is actually another Razor component that is included with the Blazor UI framework, right? So that's included for you, bring it in via the .NET SDK. You also have this survey prompt component over here, which is also another component that's not just included with Razor, but it's actually defined in this shared folder that you can see over here. There's a survey prompt, that Razor component that's been included right here. Okay, and we will be working a lot inside this index.razor. This is going to be the one place where we're going to be defining the whole layout for our little application. But yeah, this is the index page. This index page doesn't just show up by itself, right? So as you can see in the page, there's kind of a layout that has a sidebar on the left side. So there's an entire layout set up for this application. Where is that layout defined? So if you go into the shared directory over here, you're going to see that there's a bunch of files, but among them, there's this main layout.razor file over here. And so, and I can collapse this a bit more. This is one that we know as a layout component. And you can see that it inherits from layout component base, right? Which makes it a layout component. A layout component is the one designed to render the content of other components. And as you can see, this one has a nav menu. That's a menu that shows up on the left side. But I also have a main section here where the important thing is going to be this body right here, where body is really a property of layout component base, and body is the place where the actual content of the thing that you want to show in the layout is going to show. So this is where the content of index.razor, it will be go ahead and rendered if you selected index or fetch data or the other component over there. Now, this layout component doesn't just become a layout component just because it inherits from layout component base. I mean, yes, that makes it a layout component, but how do we set up so that this is the layout that is going to be used in the application? And before that, just notice on the left side that these Razor files can also have their own CSS file, right? So as you can see, this is the CSS for the main layout.razor, and you can have additional CSS for the other Razor components. Now, where is that we define that main layout.razor is going to be the layout for the application? So that actually happens down here in app.razor, this file over here. And this one here is what we know as the root component. This is the root of the tree of components of Razor components that are going to be defined in your application. You're always going to get an app.razor. And this one here, as you can see, and let me collapse this for a moment, this defines a router component. So the router component is the one that allows you to have client-side navigation in your Blazor application. What does that mean? Well, if you go into the application, notice that if I switch into counter on the browser, there is now a /counter route. And if I switch into fetch data, there's now a /fetch data route. And these are not server-side routes. I'm not navigating anywhere in the server side. This is just in the client, in the browser. So we are doing navigation within the browser. So this is client-side navigation. And that kind of navigation, like I said, it is enabled via this router component that you see here. So we are just saying, hey, go ahead and find all the components that have defined some sort of a route. Like for instance, if you go back again into counter.razor, you can see that it defines this /counter route. So app.razor via the router component is going to say, okay, so find all of these components that define a route. For each of these ones, whenever the user navigates to one of those routes, go ahead and use the route view component over here, another Razor component, get the data of the route that we need to display and display it, guess where? In the main layout in this case. So this is one that defines the default layout for your application. It says default layout. It is going to be the main layout, and that's the main layout that we were just looking at a moment ago, right? So that's how you wire up main layout into your Razor application. And of course, there's another section here for the case that we cannot find the actual element. It will render this other piece over here. So that is great. But remember that we said that the Razor components, the dynamic components, are going to be rendered in the index page in this section over here, right? So in this div that has an ID of app. But where is that we wire up that connection between the app root component and this index page? Well, that actually happens, and let me just collapse a little bit these things. That actually happens in this program.cs file here. Program.cs is what we know as the application entry point. So these are the first lines of code that execute when you start your application. And so, for instance, this line 5 here is going to be your first line. And this one defines creates what we call a default WebAssembly host builder, right? And where is this builder object over here, which you can use to do initial configurations and register services for your Blazor application. And before we look at these 3 lines that are happening here, look at the last line here. What this guy is going to be doing is just taking that builder component, it executes this build method here, which actually configures all of the things that you have defined before it, and then it invokes this run async method to actually kick off the execution of the application. But now the important thing, or the interesting thing, is going to be this line here, line 6, where we are saying, hey, I have a list of root components and I want to add one root component here. So what is going to be that root component? It's going to be the app component we just talked about, right? So that is the app component that's defined right here, app.razor. Right? So we want to add that root component, and where do we want to add it? Well, there's a selector here, as you can see, there's a selector with pound app that says, hey, in the index page, right, which is the page where we render everything, find the ID or the element that has with ID of app, and in that place, put the contents of the app component. So as you remember, www index.html, we have this ID of app. So that means that we're going to be overriding the content that's in here that initially will show a loading progress, but then go ahead and place the content of the app component, right? And everything else that's included inside it, right? So program.cs is the one that's going to be initially wiring up these things. And of course, it's going to be doing more than that, right? So there's this other head outlet component, but there's also these services, as you can see here, this services collection that we're going to be talking about later on, but these are services able to be reused across your application, but we will talk more about that later on. Now there's also this import.razor file here. This defines a bunch of using statements for namespaces that you may want to be using across the entire Blazor application. So that way you don't have to be declaring each of these usings one by one in the different places in your application, right? So it's a nice way to concentrate a bunch of reusable usings. As you saw, when we opened the first Razor component, VS Code detected that this was a Blazor type of application and it has C# code, and it prompted us to generate stuff for us. So that created a VS Code folder and created these 2 files over here. Now let me close this. Now, if for any reason this directory and these files did not get auto-generated for you, you can also prompt VS Code to do that for you manually. And you can do that by doing the following. So you can just go ahead and do view Command-Palette, or you can also use this combination of Ctrl-Shift-P in Windows, and then you're going to be looking for an option that says .NET Generate Assets for Build and Debug. So you just have to select that option, and that's going to go ahead and generate those initial files for you. So you can click on that one, right? And in my case, it will say, yeah, replace existing build and debug assets. I'll say cancel because I already have them. But if you didn't have them, it will go ahead and generate them for you. So what are these files? Well, we just have 2 files here. There's task.json that defines the initial series of tasks that you can execute in VS Code. And so the most important one is going to be this one here, which is the build task that is going to be used for building the project, right? So you know that you can always just open your terminal like we did. I'm going to do Ctrl-C here, and I'll clean this. You can always just do .NET build, and that's going to go ahead and build the project, right? But since you're VS Code, what you want to do is just take advantage of shortcuts within this code editor to do this faster. So now that we have this build task defined here, what you can also do is just go into terminal and then run build task, right? And that will go ahead and build the project. As you can see, it is building the project for us. So that is integration into VS Code. Now, the cool thing about this is that it also has its shortcut, right? It says Ctrl plus Shift plus V at this in Windows. So I can do the same thing. I can go ahead and do Ctrl Shift V, and that will go ahead and build my project. So that's a very nice shortcut that you get there, and you don't have to be building the project manually every single time, right? So that is our build task. And then if you go into launch.json, we also have the configurations for being able to debug, not just run, but debug the Blazor application in our box. We're going to be making a few changes here that are not set up by default to make sure that we can debug the application in the box. But before doing that, one more file that I want to show you here is inside properties. There's this launch settings.json file that I'm going to open. And really this defines a bunch of settings for your development environment, right? So these are developer only settings that you want to, that are very useful for local development. So for instance, this defines the application URL that you're going to find right here. Application URL. This defines that my application should be running in HTTP localhost port 5259 as we saw. So this is the setting that defines that. And it also defines that we are working in a development environment. Like ASP.NET Core environment variable defines that this is a development environment. And if you didn't have this, it will just revert into a production environment. So a few things change when you do that kind of change in this environment. And if you wanted, I mean, since we have the HTTP profile as the first one, the application is always going to be running just in HTTP. But if you wanted to use HTTPS in your local box, all you have to do is perhaps change the order of these profiles or get rid of the HTTP profile, and then you will be reverting into the HTTPS profile that's going to be running things in HTTPS. For our purposes, just running HTTP is just going to be just fine, but you certainly want to be using HTTPS when you deploy to production, which means a bunch of other configurations, and this file is not going to be used in that case, right? So let me close that, and let's now go back into launch.json, because like I said, we do need to specify a few additional configurations to make sure that we can debug this application in VS Code. So let me actually collapse this a little bit. And as you can see, we are defining here a few things. The first one is going to be the name of this configuration. Then we're saying that this is a Blazor WebAssembly application, request launch. This one here means that this is going to be the working directory as we are executing the debugging session. But there are two things missing here. One of those things is going to be the URL. The browser can know where is that we are going to be hosting our application so that the debugger can connect to it. That URL is actually going to be in properties, launch settings. Like I said, this is the location where we have the URL. So what I'm going to do is just copy. I'm going to copy that URL from my HTTP profile into launch.json, and I'm going to paste it right here. Okay, so make sure that you have here the exact URL that you have in launch.json so that your debug session can happen properly. And then just one more setting that I'm going to define here, and this is totally optional, is the browser that I'm going to be using. So in my case, I do want to use Edge, so I'm going to pick Edge here. If you want to use Chrome, feel free to choose Chrome in your case. In both cases, things should work just fine. Okay, so I'm going to save this file, so Ctrl+S just to save. And now let's verify that we can actually debug this application, right? And for that, all I'm going to do is go into program.cs, and I'm going to place a breakpoint. Let's say, like I said, this is the first line that should execute. So this should confirm that we can debug the application. Now, how do we kick off the debugging? You can do it a couple of ways. If you look at the activity bar on the left side, we have this icon over here that kicks off the debug view. So I'm going to click on that. And if you expand this a bit, you're going to see that there's a drop down here that shows all of the debugging configurations that have been defined. So if you saw in launch.json, we defined the name launch and debug standalone Blazor WebAssembly, and that's going to be showing up over here, launch and debug standalone Blazor WebAssembly app. So that is the debugging configuration that you can use. And you could have more than one over here, but for now, just having that one is good enough. And so at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and click on this play button here to start debugging. And notice that you can also just do F5 if you want it. You don't have to click on that, you can do F5, but let's just click on that one for now. And let's see what happens. So as you can see, the debugging session has started right here. Here's my browser. So it is kind of stopped right there because it is waiting because of the debug breakpoint right here. As you can see, we hit the breakpoint, right? At this point, you can go ahead and start going line by line if you wanted to. Let's do a step over, F10. As you can see, you can go one by one across each of these lines. So you're debugging directly in the client via Visual Studio Code, right? And you can see, even inspect things here, right? So you can see the state of the builder object here if you wanted to. Debugging seems to be working properly. I'll just click play, and that will go ahead and finish loading the application in my browser right there. So debugging is working properly, everything is working properly, and so that is great. For now, let's just go ahead and close the browser, and let's go ahead and also stop the debugging session. And like I said, anytime you want, you just hit F5, and that will allow you to go ahead and start debugging. Now, like I said, we're not going to be using all of the assets or initial assets that the template generated for us. So at this point, what I like to do is just to do a little bit of cleanup to have kind of almost empty slate where we can start introducing the actual layout of our application. So what I'm going to do is just start closing a few things here. I'll go back into the Explorer view. I'll collapse this, and I'm going to be removing anything that we're not going to be using across this course. So I'll go into the pages folder, And we're not going to be using either the counter or the fetch data razor components. So I'll just click delete on these two. So those, go to recycle bin. We'll stick with the index.razor page. And then we're going to be going into shared, where we're going to get rid of navmenu.razor.css and survey prompt. We're not going to be using those. So recycle bin. And then also in www, there's this sample data folder here, which all it has is just a JSON file that is going to be used for the fetch data sample, but we don't need that really. So we're just going to right click on sample data and just delete that. All right, so that's gone. And now that we did that, we need to fix just a couple of things here to make sure that the things keep compiling properly. So if we go into index.razor over here, of course, this survey prompt element does not exist anymore because we just deleted it. So we're going to delete this part from here. Now it is gone. Okay, I'm going to save this file. The next thing that we want to fix is in shared main layout.razor. So this one right now is using elements that we also don't have. And that's going to be our nav menu over there. And so we're not going to be using that one. So I'm just going to clean up things like this. So now we only have this main element. And we're not going to be using this top row, not needed. We'll stick to this, just this article element and the body, and that's all we're going to be showing up over there. Okay, so if you just save this and we run the application again, so I'm going to do Ctrl-J and I'm going to be switching into my terminal. So let me go ahead and I'll do these 3 dots here to go to terminal. I'll delete this terminal here and I'll just do .NET Run again. Okay, I'll go back into my page that I was running before and I'll go to home and I'll just refresh the whole page. And this is what you should be seeing now, right? We just have hello world, welcome to your new app, but the rest is just pretty much empty. So this is going to be our initial slate where we're going to be kind of painting our pretty awesome application. Let's now go back into Visual Studio Code and let's start working on this index page. So let me minimize this. And then I'm going to stop executing my application by doing Ctrl-C in the terminal. This Ctrl-C will stop completely the application. And I'm going to close the terminal. I'm going to also close main layout.razor. I'll collapse this. And we're going to be focusing on index.razor. Let me actually collapse that so we can see better. So first, let's fix both the page title and the H1 here. So this should read as game catalog. Okay, this is our game catalog page. Let's do the same thing for H1. So page title is for the browser tab, and then game catalog is going to be just the title that shows at the top of the page. The main thing that we want to show in this index page is the list of games, right? The list of games in the game catalog. So to do that, what we're going to do is just to implement a very simple HTML page. So if you know your HTML, you will know that that can be done via a simple table element here, right? So it's going to be a table element. And then what we want to do here is first specify the headers for our table. So we will do that via the head element here. Okay, and then we're going to specify elements for the following properties. It's going to be for the ID. And then perhaps I'll copy this a few times. Let me just leave this space there. We're going to be needing perhaps 5 more of this, like that. And so we're going to be showing the ID, the name, the genre, the price, and the release date for our games. Okay, we're going to be leaving just one more for the actions that later on the user is going to take in these games. Okay, so that's going to be the header of the table. And then we're going to specify another section here for the body, right? So the body section. We will fill this body in a moment, but for now we have a basic layout for our table. So let's see how this goes. I'm just going to open my terminal via Ctrl-J, and then I'll do again .NET Run. And we're going to go back into the page over here. Let's refresh this and see how it looks like. Yeah, as expected. So we have now, let's see, game catalog in the page title over there in the tab. We have game catalog as our title for this page as an H1, and then we have the different headers in there. This is looking as expected. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'll do Ctrl-C and I'll close this. Now, in order to show any actual data in this page, we will have to define what we know as a model. This is going to be the model class that represents our games, right? And we are going to be showing a list of these games in the page. So here's where we're going to start writing some C# to come up with that list of games. So we're going to be opening our Explorer section here. And what we're going to do is just create a brand new folder just at the root in GameStore.client. I'll do right click, and we're going to create a new folder that we're going to be calling models. And inside models, we're going to create a brand new class. and we'll say right click, new C# class, and this class is going to be named just game. As you can see, we got our namespace GameStore.client.models that corresponds to the name of the directory and the name of our models directory, and then we have our class here. Now, one thing that I like to do is to change this namespace from this shape into a simplified version of that. So if you just click, you see there's a light bulb over here. So you can click on that one, and then you can convert this namespace into what we know as a file scope namespace. So if you just click on that, you're going to see that now you have the namespace here ending with semicolon, and now the class, there's no more curly braces surrounding this class here. So that's kind of a different way of laying out your C# class over here, and just saves a little bit of space so that you don't have to scroll to the right a few spaces. So if I do Control C, you'll see how it looked before, right? With these curly braces over there. Then I'll do Control Y, and then we'll save a little bit of space here, right? So it's optional, but I think it saves a little bit of space in your C# class. Let's now define the properties of our game class here. This is going to be the same properties that we just saw in the HTML table. So we're going to do prop, and then if you just do prop and then you use tab, that's going to auto-populate a C# property here. And then all we have to do is just fill in the details. So in this case, it's going to be an integer, and this is going to be the ID, the unique identifier for this property. And then we will keep doing this a few times to populate all of the properties. So I'll just type prop, tab, and then this is going to be string name. You will see that at this point, a bit of a highlight here, right? So what does this mean? This is really one of the different set of warnings that are trying to help you to make sure that you don't run into some common issues later on. So what this is saying is that this name property, since it is a string, it is supposed to have some value either when we declare a property or in the constructor of this class here. Since we have not specified any value for this string, it is warning us saying, hey, you actually may run into a null reference issue later on because you have not specified any initial value for this name property here. So one way to fix this would be to say that this goes equals, let's say, string.empty. And so that will give it the default value of an empty string to that string over there, if you wanted to. And then another way to fix this will be to also define a constructor for this class here, but we're not going to be needing a constructor for this. Yet another way that we can do this, and which is the way that we're going to be following in this course, is to specify that this is going to be required property. So we will just type here required. By doing this, we are specifying that whoever creates an instance of this class must specify a value for the name property, right? Either via constructor or via setting it directly the parameters when the class is constructed. At that point, the name property has to be specified. Otherwise, you cannot move forward, and that will generate even a compilation error, I think. That is one way that you can handle this situation where you have some properties like string properties that should have some value when after the construction. And so we're going to be using this a few times here. So let's move on with the next property. So let's say prop. It's going to be string genre, right? So it's going to be the same thing. So let's do required. That will satisfy the constraint. And then let's move on to prop decimal price. So it's going to be our price. And I think, decimal should be a good data type for something like a price. And then lastly, we have our datetime release date, right? So this is the day when the game was released. Let's clean up a little bit our file here. You see we have a bunch of namespaces at the top that we're not quite using. To clean up that, you can click on this light bulb over here, and you can use select this remove unnecessary usings. Now, a quick shortcut here that I'll be using all over the place, as you're going to see, instead of using the light bulb, what I'll just do is select the section where I'm going to be working on, and I'll do just Control dot. And that's going to pop up all of these nice helpers that you can see here. So then I'll just click on remove unnecessary usings, and that's going to clean up our file. And at this point, one more productivity feature that I can offer you here to avoid having to save every single time we change a file is to use this feature that's over here in File, Autosave, right here. Right? If you enable that, it means that anytime you change your files, they will be automatically saved as you start creating them. Right, so some people don't like to use it, but I find it fairly helpful so that you just don't forget to save files and later on just regret it. So yeah, we'll be using that in this course. Now, since we have this model class ready, how do we use it, right? How do we use it to render our table of games in the index page? So let's go back into the index page. And so the nice thing about Blazor pages is that you can combine both HTML and C# over here. In this case, what I'd like to do is to define, for now, a static list of games in this table. And to do that, we're going to be defining a code section for this file. So if you go down just under table here, we're going to be defining a code section. And this is going to be a section where you can go ahead and freely add your C# code. Okay, what we can do is just define here our private array of game objects. It's going to be called games, right? So it's going to be a new array, and we're going to open and close curly braces. Okay, like that. First thing here is going to be make sure that we are using the namespace needed for being able to use our game class. So as you can see, it cannot find the game class right now because we have not imported the namespace where this lives. So this lives in the GameStore.client.models namespace. So let's click over here. And then, as you can see, you can make use of this action here that says add using models. So I click on that. And with that, you'll see that at the top, there's a new statement here, add using models. That means that we are now able to use any of the classes that have been defined in the models namespace, right? So by default, this page is going to be in the GameStore.client namespace. So we need to append the missing part of that, which is models, right? So we will be using models over there, and that will give us access to the game class that we have over here. Now to define our initial array of games, we're going to just say here, new game, and then we will initialize the properties of this game class right away. So let's define an ID. So let's say this is going to be ID1. Let's define the name. So here we're just going to start coming up with a few game names. So, and I'll pick a few of my favorites here. So this is going to be Street Fighter 2. All right, one of my favorite games of all time. Then it's going to be the genre is going to be fighting. Okay, and then the price is going to be $19.99. And then the release date for this game, let's say it's going to be a new daytime. And then for the year, we're going to be using 1991. It's been a while since this game was released. And it's going to be February 1. And as you can see, we're getting a little bit of a warning here about our price down here. And this is because there are multiple numeric types where a number that has decimal places, it could be converted into. This could be either a double, a float, a decimal, any of these ones. So the compiler doesn't like the fact that we have not specified what exactly this number is going to be, even when the property we know it is a decimal. So you have to be explicit here. So in order to do that, what you can do is just append an M suffix over there, and that should clearly tell the compiler that we do want to be using a decimal for this one. And so I'll just also fix this issue here by adding a semicolon over there, and that should fix things. Now, code formatting for C# code inside of a Blazor file can be not really perfect sometimes, right? So if I do Ctrl+S to save this file right now, you're going to see that the formatting is going to be screwed up a little bit, right? So I'll do Ctrl+C to undo this. And so we will let the autosave feature just keep saving the file for us, and so that we can try to keep this in a nice format. But later on, this code is actually going to switch into a C# file, right? And so that's not going to be an issue anymore, right? Let's keep going and let's add a couple of more games, right? So now we have this one game, and then I'll do just comma, and then I'll add one more here and comma and one more there. And so for our second game, we're going to go with another one of my favorites, Final Fantasy 14. And so this is going to be a role-playing game. Role-playing. This one is going to cost $59.99. The release date of this one was in 2010, September 30. And lastly, for the last game, we're going to go, of course, this should be ID number 2, and then this last one is going to be ID number 3. For this last one, we're going to go with sports. So this is going to be FIFA 23, and then this is going to be sports. This is kind of a more expensive game, so it's going to be $69.99. And then lastly, release date for this one was in 2022, in September 27. And with that, we have our initial set of static games prepared. So yes, so this is a static list of games, and keep in mind that we will be iterating many times over these examples until we reach the final version of this, right? So this is not going to be the final way that we're going to be using our data. You're going to see this evolve in many ways across this course. So now that we have this array created, how do we use it in the table? So let's go now up over here. And I'm going to also collapse this for now. What we can do is just focus in this T-body section over here. And let me actually scroll down. So T-body, we can open another C# section over here to iterate over the games array that we have already. So like I said, we can mix C# with HTML with this Razor syntax. So what we can do now is just say over here, for each, and I'll do tab, and that's going to open up a for each section here, right? So I just did tab after typing for each. And then what we can say is that it's going to be for each var game in the collection. So what's going to be the collection? The collection is our game. So we can just say games. So here is where we can go ahead and display our games. So as you know, for each row in the table, we need a tr, right? So it's going to be tr. And then for this tr, we're going to be defining this TD element for each thing that we want to display here. And there's going to be actually a few of these. So let me add 5 more of these there. And for the first one, we're going to be using our game.id. So this is ID property of the game element. Okay, so notice that anytime we want to reach out to one of these C# properties, we just introduce an @ symbol, right? And then we specify whatever we want to do in terms of C#, right? So that is the Razor syntax. And let's go into, for the next one, it's going to be game.name. Then we have game.genre, and then game.price, and finally game.release date. Just by doing that, we should be able to see now a living table in our page. So what I'm going to do is, again, do Ctrl+J, and I'll do .NET Run over here. And then let's switch again back into our page. Right here, we'll do a quick refresh. And as you can see, now we are able to see some data in the page, right? It doesn't look pretty just yet, but it has our 3 games, right? Static games that are coming from a mix of C# and HTML. Now, one thing that we can fix very quickly here is the way that we're showing the dates, right? So because we're not quite expecting to see this much. I mean, the release date is going to be the date part of this, but the time part is not quite needed here. Who cares about the time of the release? So how can we fix that quickly? So if you go back into our C#, and I'll do Ctrl+C to stop this, close terminal. What you have to do is just do a little bit of normal C# formatting, right? So we will do .toString, and then here we'll be using a standard way of formatting dates. So what we can do here is say that we want to show the month, and then the day, and then the year. And yeah, that should do it. So I'll do Ctrl+J, let's start this again, and let's go back to the page. I'll refresh this, and as you can see, now we have just the date portion, right? So the date portion of our dates, there's no more a time appended over there. Now, this is fine, but it still doesn't look really good, right? So we should be able to display this in a much better way. To do that, we could either come up with our own CSS, right? The style sheets to fix this, but a much better way is to take advantage of the Bootstrap framework that has already been included for us in this via the Blazor template. So if you go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'll go to Ctrl+C, and I'll close the terminal, and we go back to Explorer, remember that in www over here, in CSS, we do have this Bootstrap folder here, right? Which includes these 2 files. And what this is the entire Bootstrap UI framework, well, styling framework has been included for us over here. And if you want to know more about this UI styling framework, what you want to do is just go to the getbootstrap.com page over here. We're going to be able to find all the information about the different ways to use Bootstrap in your application. I like Bootstrap very much. It is not the only way or not the only styling framework. There are several others, but this is the one that's included for you in the Blazor template. And so we might as well just take advantage of it, right? And so in this case, what we want to do is to know better ways to render our table. So to do that, what we're going to do is just go, let's scroll down. We can go into read the docs, and this should give you all the information that you need to apply different elements that come from Bootstrap. Now, if you go back quickly into VS Code, one thing that we should notice is what is the version of Bootstrap that we are using. If you look at this very first line over here, you're going to notice that we are using version 5.1. Just make sure that you are focusing on that version as you browse this documentation. So I'll go into the right side over here. It says 5.3. That's the last version that has been released at the time that I'm recording this. So just switch that into 5.1.3 in this case. and that will set us exactly in the version that we are interested in right now. And so yeah, this has plenty of documentation here that you may want to read, but in this case, what we're interested in is in tables. So for that, you want to go into content and then tables. And if you go across this page, you're going to be finding many details about how to format your tables. And there's a lot of details here. There's a lot of variants and ways that you can lay out your tables according to your taste, right? And so I'm not going to go across this documentation in detail, but just wanted to let you know that this documentation is here. I use it a lot, so make sure that you use it as needed. What we're going to do is just take advantage of several of the stats that have been declared over here. So let me go back into VS Code and I'll close this. And I'll close that. Let's scroll up a little bit over here until we can see the table element. And so we are going to give styles into the table, right? Based on Bootstrap. So for that, we'll just say class. And then the first style we're going to apply here is the table style. But then let's also apply a few other ones. It's going to be table striped. We're going to be using also table bordered and table hover. Okay, so that will give us some nice style for the table. And let's also customize the header of the table for the head. So we're going to say this is going to be class, is going to be table dark. That's a nice one to have. And with that, let's go ahead and rerun this. So Ctrl J to open terminal, .NET run. And let's go back into our page and let's see what we got. So I'll go ahead and refresh this. And as you can see, right away, this turns into a much better looking table, right? That it even changes a little bit as we hover into each of the rows. So this is a much pleasing way of looking at your table. So again, remember that you are able to do this because you're using the Bootstrap framework that, of course, it is over here, but also it is imported in index.html. And I'll collapse this for a moment. You go back to index, notice that it is being imported already for you, right? If you started from a place where this was not imported already, you can just go ahead and import it by yourself. So I'll close that. And if we go back into our, well, let me actually just do Ctrl J to show that, yeah, we're still running terminal over there. And so if we are back here in the page, so at this point, we do have our table being rendered in there. And so what I'd like to do now is to figure out a way to create another piece of UI so that we can also add elements here. So we can create new games in here, so not just list them. And to do that, of course, we'll have to come up with a brand new Blazor file, right? So if we just go back to Visual Studio Code and I'll do Ctrl C here and close this. In order to create or edit page, we'll have to come up with a brand new Blazor file. But also the problem that we'll have with that is that this, and let me collapse this. Right now we have our data is hard-coded in this page in index.razor. And if we come up with a brand new page or a brand new component, it will not have access to this array of games over here. So what we want to do is to introduce a brand new class that is going to take care of holding the data for now and that we can reuse across multiple of these Blazor components. To do that, let's go now into our Explorer view over here and let's collapse a few things like that. What we want to do is just right click in GameStore.client. We will say new C#. It's going to be a class. And this class is going to be named GameClient. Okay, just GameClient over there. Okay. And so, like I said, the purpose of this class is going to be to centralize the way that we manage the data for our application for now. And you will see how this evolves over time as across this course. But first, let's start by just fixing this namespace. So I'll just do Control dot so that we convert this into a file scope namespace, just like that. So that's the right namespace. Also, I'm going to clean up at the top here. I'll do Control dot and then remove unnecessary usings. And in this class, the first thing that we're going to do is to grab that array that we have defined here, this private games array. We're going to grab it. So I'll just go ahead and cut it from here and I'll take it into our game client. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste it over here, right there. And of course, this class is still not aware of the namespace where we have our game class. So I'll just click on game, I'll do Control dot, and then it will say using GameStore.client.modals. I'll do that, and that will allow us to reuse that namespace. Since this class is going to take care of allowing us to just retrieve the array of games or the list of games, but also modify the list as we create new items or update items or delete items, we will not keep using a simple array here, but we'll switch into something else that can be more dynamic. And that is going to be actually a list. So we're going to transform this into a list of games. Instead of having this, what we're going to do is, instead of that, we will say just list of game. Right, so it's still it's called games, but it's going to be a list of game, and then instead of a new array, it's going to be just new like this. Now let's see if we can format this a little bit better. I'm just going to select this like that. Okay, yeah, that looks better. And then the thing is that for now, we want our different Blazor components to have a very easy way to reuse this games collection here. And so for that, we're not going to be asking them to create instances of the game client, but instead we are going to just turn this into a static class for now that can be used across any of our Blazor components. To do that, we're going to be just specifying that this class is going to be static, right? So static class game client, and this array here is going to be also a static list of games. So that way our components don't have to be creating instances of this, and because if they did that, each component will have their own instance and their own list of games, and that's not what we want for now. Right, so by doing static, every single component will be reusing the same list of games. And again, like I said, this is going to evolve over time, so don't worry about the way that we're doing things for now. So now we have this list of games. We can go ahead and define a method to be able to retrieve the games from the different components. Because notice that this right now, it is a private games array or games list. So we need some sort of a method to be able to retrieve them. And by the way, there is a little bit of a warning here stating that this field should be read-only, which makes sense because we are initializing this right here as part of the construction of the static class. So to formalize that, what we can do is just say that this is going to be a private static read-only list. Okay, which means that this after constructing this list, nobody else is going to assign a new value to this games object here. I mean, we can add or remove elements from the list, but we cannot set a new value for the games variable itself. Now let's scroll down here, and what we're going to do is just to add a little bit of a method that we're going to name. So let's go down here. This is going to be a public method. It's going to be also static, and then this is going to retrieve or provide us with a game array. It's going to be get games, all right, and we'll say return games.toArray. Okay, so our list is turned into array, which is the array that the components are going to be expecting. So now that we have this class ready, we can go ahead and start using it across the first component, which is index.razor. So let's go back over here, index.razor, and then of course we got rid completely of the games array here, and the page is complaining because we don't have a games array anymore. So what I'm going to do is let me just do Control-C here to get back to this list, but we're not going to be defining the array explicitly like that anymore. So I'll remove most of this. And what we're going to say is that we will define the variable there, but we will be providing a value for it in a different way. Now, since we will not be initializing this variable in constructor anymore, we're back into this warning that says that, that's okay, but you should have some non-null value for this variable as part of the constructor, right? But it is actually okay to initialize this with null because there will be a method that we will be invoking later on to populate the value. So instead of having this being a game array, we will turn it into a nullable array. We can do that by using the question mark right here. So that way we are very explicit saying that yes, so it is okay to have a null in games when the page is constructed, but we have to make sure that we initialize this with some value at some point. And to do that, what we're going to do is just scroll down a little bit. So I'll do this, and we're going to start taking advantage of some of the built-in methods of Blazor so that allow you to get into the life cycle of the page itself. And that first method that we're going to be using is called unneeded. So you can type here protected override, and the method that we want to specify here is void uninitialized right there. And so perhaps we can fix this a little bit like that. Uninitialized. So this is the method that's going to be invoked at the very start of the life cycle of this component. So just after construction and after this component has received any parameters, if any, then this method will be automatically be invoked by the Blazor runtime. So this is a great time for us to go ahead and initialize our array. So in this case, what we can do is just say games equals game client dot get games, right? So that's the get games method that we just implemented over here in games client. And since it's a static method, we can invoke it just like this without having to construct an instance of game client. So that would do it. Now let's scroll up a little bit. And as you can see, there is also a little bit of a warning over here. As you can see, it says, yeah, the reference of a possibly null reference. So again, the compiler is really trying to help us, saying, hey, you could run into a null reference over here, which makes sense because this table might be rendered at a time where we have not yet gotten a chance to populate this games array. And since we defined that it can be nullable, so that's a possibility. So what we can do at this point is to do a little bit of, help this page a little bit in terms of checking first if we do have a situation where the games array is null and then display something else while we wait for the component to be rendered. So what we can do is just go up here, just before the table declaration, we'll do this, the following. We will say if games is null, right? So if it is null, we will do something. So that something could be just displaying a simple loading text, right? So we'll add a paragraph here. We will do em, and then we will say loading. Okay, just like that. And so that was going to happen if games is null. But otherwise, so that comes with the else. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and display our table. So let me just grab the entire table. I'll cut that and paste it here. Okay, the table like that. And so things should look like this now. So if games is null, then do this, and then else do the following. And notice that just by doing this, the compiler understands that now it is not really possible to run into this situation where games is null right here. So if we reach this section here, this line 24, where we try to use a games array, it must have an instance. It cannot be null because we already checked it for that over there. And so yeah, the compiler is smart in the sense that it can detect that and then the warnings just go away. So let's make sure that this is still working. So I'll do Ctrl J and we will do .NET run once again. Let's go back to our page over here and now refresh this. And as you can see, things are loading just fine. So really no changes really in behavior. It's the same thing, but now the data is coming from our game client, which will open the possibility to reuse that data in other Blazor components. So now let's go back to Visual Studio Code. I'll do Ctrl C and I'll close this. So now it is time to create this brand new page where we're going to be creating and later editing our games. So to do that, let's go back into our Explorer. And what we want to do is just to place a brand new Blazor component over here. So at this time, we can either create that manually over there, or we can take advantage of the .NET CLI once again to create that Blazor component. So let's try that second option. So I'll do Ctrl J and now clean this a little bit. And let me also put things like this. What we want to do is the following. So all you have to do, let's make this bigger, .NET new. And what you want to type here is just Blazor component. And then let's give it a name. The name is going to be EditGame. We'll use it for both for creation and edition of games. And then for the output directory, that's going to be our pages directory. Notice we are still in the game store.client directory. So this should go into the subdirectory called pages. So I'll hit enter. And as you can see, we now have an EditGame Blazor component right there. Okay, so let's close terminal and let's go into EditGame. And we are going to be focusing in this file for now. So yeah, let me close game client and game for now. What we want to do is, well, just like with the other page, let's start with the basics. We can define here both page title, right? The page title is going to be, for now, it's just going to be new game. We'll see how to modify this dynamically later on. And then we will have an H1, which is going to be the title of our overall section, which is the game catalog. And then for H3 is going to just say this is going to be new game, right? This is the kind of the title of this page. Now, one more thing that we have not used before is the routing of this page. Let's see if we're using that. Yeah, we are actually using, well, it was implicit in the first case, but notice that if we go back into index.Blazor, we have this declaration of page over there, and then this kind of /. So this is going to be the route of the page, right? That's how in the client, the browser can reach this component. We have to do something very similar for EditGame to specify how is that we're going to reach this page from the client. So let's go over here and let's add a page declaration. And let's say that to reach this page, what you have to do is just say /game. And that is how you're going to be able to reach this page. We will also modify this a little bit later on, but for now, that will be enough to be able to reach this page on the client. Now it is time to define the shape or the content, I guess, for our page. So to do that, what we're going to do is, again, we're going to be using a little bit of the styles that come with Bootstrap to give it a nice layout to this page. What we want to do is to establish kind of a form where we can input all the details of the brand new game. So just here, just under new game and before our code section over there, we're going to define a div. Okay, so this is a div that's going to have a class of row. Okay, so row is one of the classes included with the Bootstrap. So again, if you want to know more about any of the classes that I'm using here, the CSS classes, just go check the Bootstrap documentation. That will give you a lot of details about any of these classes. But yeah, so you can define a row. In these rows, you can define columns, right? So that's one of the layout features of Bootstrap. So we're going to define here a column. So it's going to be div, and then it's going to be class equals, and then the class is going to be, like I said, a column. But then we don't want this column to just take over the entire width of the page. These columns can have up to 12 sections in this column. But what we want to say is that it's going to be we just want 4 sections so that it just takes kind of the left side of the page. And then we're going to be using the SM modifier here. So make sure that it renders nicely even in smallest spaces. Again, you can read more about this in the Bootstrap page. Now comes the interesting part here, because here's where we're going to use a component that is called a form or an edit form that is built in as part of Blazor. So what you can say here is just edit form. What you want to do here is to specify a few things. First thing is going to be the model, because there has to be some class that we are going to bind into this form here to show its data, right? And to capture that data. And so, but before we can define that model, we have to define actually where is going to be that class. So now it's time to go very briefly into the code section over here, and we have to define that class that represents the model. So I'm just going to say private game, we just game. This is going to be equals. And of course, we have not imported the right namespace for this just yet. I'll just go into game here. I'll say control dot, and we will say using models right there. So now we can take advantage of the game type here. So this is going to be new. And then we're going to provide some initial values to this. We cannot just leave it as null here because that's going to cause trouble in the case of this page here. So we will just going to say that we're going to say the name is string.empty. The genre is also going to be string.empty. The release date, let's say that by default we're going to be using datetime.utc now, and that should be good enough for our initial game here. So this is going to be, like I said, the object that's going to be bound to the form that we're going to edit. So we're just initializing the form with kind of empty values, and then we'll let the user populate the values that he wants to use. But now that we have defined this variable, we are able to provide a model for our edit form. So now you can go into edit form and just say model is going to be add game. And now that we have access to that, we can define the different input elements for our form. For each of the elements, we're going to define here another div. So it's going to be, first, let's put a label here. There's going to be a label that's going to be for our name element. And the class is going to be form label. And the actual thing that we want to display with this label is going to be name. Now, where is that name identified? That name input, that's going to be an input text like this. So again, this is another Blazor component that allows you to input some text, right? And so the ID, like we said, this is going to, if the label is for name, so name is what we want to use right here, right? So the ID is going to be name. And then, like I said, we have to bind this input element into the game model that we're using. So at this point, what you want to use is this bind directive over here, bind value. And then you're going to say that's going to be equals to game.name. That means that any values that the user enters into this input text they're going to land into the game variable that we have defined over here, and that is connected as the model for this form. And then the next thing is going to be to define some class for this input element. So the class is going to be form control. All right, and then we can just close that input text. That's how you can define a little bit of one input for our game. And then one more thing that we may want to do is just to add a little bit of spacing between the elements, because we are going to be creating a few of these. So let's add a class over here that is going to be MB3. That means margin bottom is going to be 3. So 3 spaces after this one here. And so just to save time, I'm going to be copying this one, and I'll add, I guess 1, 2, and 3 copies of that one for the other elements that we want to input here. So the second one is going to be the genre, like that. So we'll change that into genre, which binds to genre in the game variable. But yeah, that's fine. So this is another input text. Then the next one, let's keep going. The next one is going to be for our price. So let's name this one. So price is going to be the ID, right? So input is going to be named price. We will say this is price. But then the type of the input element is not going to be input text. I mean, we could do text here, but we can also take advantage of other types of elements that are better suited for this data type. In this case, what we want to use here is input number, right? And you'll see how this renders differently than the other one. So this is input number. We will change that in the right side also. So this is for the price. So we'll say game.price. So that defines our number. And the last one is going to be our release date. So release date is going to go here and here. And then this is going to be release date. Release date. Again, we could show this as a simple input text, but since this is a date, we can also take advantage of another type, which is the input date. So I'll change input text into input date right here. And then I'll change that also on the right side. So that turns it into an input that's going to be able to show a nice datetime picker for the date. And so with that, I think we should be able to render this component in the browser and see just how it looks so far. It cannot do much, but at least we should be able to render it. So let's go ahead and do Ctrl J. We will do again .NET Run. And let's see what we get. Of course, we don't have a way in the browser to just navigate directly from the home into this page. So let's just remember that this is located at /game, right? So let's go to the browser now. So here we are. And we want to do is just say /game, right? Enter. And now, as you can see, we are able to render our brand new form to input game, right? And notice that it does have, the what we specify for the title over there. And then we have one element for each of the types. So notice that we have, these are the input texts for name and genre. But for the price, we have something a little bit different. Let's initialize the value with 0. But then you can do this thing where you can take the values up or down as needed, right? For the price. So it's a better input. That's what the input number would show for us. And then notice that for release date, this also shows this nice datetime picker, right? That you can use to select a different date also as needed. That is nice, but then of course this form is not going to be doing much until we actually take the inputs of the user and add a brand new game into our games list. So let's go back into VS Code, do Ctrl C again, and back here. What we want to do now is to start taking advantage of our game client to be able to add elements to the list of games. So to do that, let's go back into Explorer and let's go back into our game client class over here. Now class this again. And what we're going to do is just to add one new method that is going to allow us to add elements into the list of games. So I'll just scroll down and I'll add a brand new method. It's going to be public static void add game. And we're going to receive the game over here, right? And all we have to do at this point is say games.add the game. So that method will allow us to add a game into our existing list of games. Now, where are we going to be calling this method from the edit page? So let's go to editGame.razor. And of course, that's going to happen in the code section of editGame. And what we want to do now is to define a method that's going to be attached to the onSubmit method of our EditForm. So let's first define that method over here. So we're going to be naming this private void, and it's going to be handle submit. And so in this method, all we're going to do is just say game client dot add game, which is a brand new method, and that's going to be the current game that we are using in this form. Now, how do we invoke this handle submit method? So what we want to do is just scroll up into the definition of our form. So right here, where we define the form and the model, we want to attach something to the onSubmit event, right? So onSubmit, we will be using this handle submit method that we just created. And of course, in order to be able to submit this and to trigger the submission, we need some sort of a button, right, in the form so that we can submit the element. Just down here before edit form, we are going to add a simple button like this, which is going to be of type submit, and the text is going to say just save. We should also give it a little bit of style here. So let's do class is going to be button, and this is going to be button primary. Once again, these styles come from Bootstrap, and so the documentation page will have more info about what you can do with these buttons. Yeah, with this, we should be able to go ahead and start submitting the data that has been entered by our users. And this time, what we're going to do is just, instead of just running the application, we're going to set up a debugging session just to verify that the element is actually getting added to the collection, right? What I'm going to do is just put a breakpoint, in this case in line 42, which is where the game should be added, right? And that will let us confirm that handle submit is being invoked. What we're going to do now is just hit F5. So I'll just hit F5 here. So that's going to kick off our debugging session. And of course, we still have the breakpoint that we had in program.cs. So I'm going to remove that breakpoint and hit play so that we keep going. And we can see the list of games here, right? So just before, I'm going to do /game to go into our create game page. You can see we have the create game page here. And so let's just add some random data, right? So random game, some genre, and then the price is going to be, let's say 33. Let's just leave the default release date. And then what I want to verify is that when I click on save, we should hit that handle submit. Yeah, you can see we hit handle submit. We are right here. And what I'm going to do is just step into, actually with this one, step into or F11 into add game right here. And then I will be using now my F10 in my box just to keep going. Actually, let's just keep going this way. So I'll say, yeah, stop over, and then step over, and now the game should be part of our games collection, and we can quickly inspect that by looking at games over here. See, we have now 4 elements, right, which is expected. 4 elements where the last one should be our random game. Yeah, it is right there. Things are working as expected, so I'll just click play. Of course, if we go back to the browser, what we're going to see is that nothing is really happening here, right, from the point of view of the user. And that makes sense because we have not yet told Blazor that what is that we want to do after we add or submit this new data into the page. So what we want to do now is to instruct Blazor that what we want to do is just to go back into our home page to see the new game being added into the home page. So let's see how to do that. What we're going to do now is let's just close the browser and let's stop this debugging session completely. And we want to go back into editGame.Blazor, and I'll collapse this for a moment, remove this breakpoint, and just after add game, what we can do is use another Blazor component called the NavigationManager in order to navigate to another page after something happens in our code. Now, in order to use the NavigationManager, you first have to do what we know as injecting that element into the page. And you can do that all the way into the top. Just after using modals, what you can say here is inject, and here you can declare the type of what you want to inject here, which is NavigationManager in this case, and then we'll just say NavigationManager. What does that mean? I mean, inject is really part of, it refers to a technique that's called dependency injection. That what it does is that it allows you to insert instances of types, in this case into our Blazor component, but these are instances that have been registered somewhere else, usually in the initialization of the application. They have been registered, let's say, into what we know as a service container. So, and you can think of that as a container of different types of classes that can be reused across the entire lifetime of the application. And we'll talk more about dependency injection later on. But for now, just know that the NavigationManager is one of the standard types that are always registered for you as the Blazor application is bootstrapped, as it initializes. And you can always go ahead and inject an instance of NavigationManager over here. So notice that because of this, we don't have to say NavigationManager equals new NavigationManager. We don't have to do that in our code. We don't have to construct it because the runtime is already doing that for us when the application initializes, and all we have to do is just request an instance of it and it will be available for us. So there are a few types that are available like this from Blazor, and it's a nice and great facility that we can use. So now we have an instance of NavigationManager. We can now go down again into our handle submit method, and just after adding the game, what we can say is just NavigationManager dot navigate to. And where do we want to navigate? Well, we just want to go back into the home page, and that home page is in this root location, right? And yeah, that should do it, right? So let's go back into our page. So at this time, I'm going to do these 3 dots to go into terminal, and I'll just do .NET Run once again. And let's go back into the page that we had opened before, this one here. And let's just go back to the home for a moment. Let's see what we have in home. Yeah, we have these 3 games over there. So let's go back now into /game. This time, let's enter again just some random game. So random game, genre is going to be sports, some price in there, and then we'll keep that default release date. So now I'll hit on save. And notice that we're immediately taken back into the home page and our game is showing up right here. So that is great. It's great to have the random game added to the list here. But as you may have noticed, we don't have an ID for this game. And so that's not really a big deal at this time, but we can fix that very quickly, very easily by figuring out a way to add an unique identifier to each subsequent game here. So to fix that quickly, what we can do is just, let's go back into the code and I'll stop my server again. I'll close that. And we're going to go into our game client, and in our add game function, the one that we just created to add games, we're going to specify what is going to be the unique identifier of this brand new game. And to keep things simple, we'll just say that the identifier is going to be 1 plus a number on top of the biggest number that we have so far for IDs in our games collection. So what we're going to do now is just say game.id is going to be from our games collection. We will use the max function, right? So this is part of a series of extensions that you can use on C# to be able to manipulate your data, right? So we'll say just .max, and so we will specify kind of a lambda function here where we're going to say that we want the max from game.id, right? So from the collection, just get the max ID and then add 1, all right? So that's as simple as that. So whatever the max it is, we want to add just 1 more. With that, let's go back to the browser. So I'll do .NET Run once again in my terminal, back into my browser. So let's refresh this page. We will not have the random game anymore. We're going to navigate into game. We will add again. So random is going to be sports, price 22, and then I'll hit save. And now, as you can see, we now have a brand new number. This is 4 because the max was 3 plus 1, it is 4, right? So that is nice, but it will also be good to have a way to go into that edit page without having to mess with the browser and navigation bar, right? So at this point, what we want to have is some button in this page that can take us directly into that page to create new games. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code over here, and let's head down into, let me just close this program and let's go into index.razor. We're going to be doing something similar to what we did in EditGame, right? So we're going to add a button and we're going to use a Navigation Manager to go to that page. So first thing is going to be to inject once again the Navigation Manager at the top. So we'll just copy that line that we have in EditGame. We're going to copy this and we're going to paste it over here, paste. So now we have a Navigation Manager available in index.razor. The next thing is that at the very top of the page, we're going to display this button that we're going to be using for navigating to the edit page. So let's just define a simple div here, okay, which is going to be of class row to define a brand new row. And also let's specify MB4 so that there's a little bit of spacing between this row and what comes after, which is the games table. And then let's define another div here, which is going to be of class, of course, column. So you always have rows and then columns. So it's going to be a column, it's going to be of 6 spaces, we'll say. And then let's also use the SM modifier here so that it works nice in smaller resolutions. Here is where we can specify the actual button, which is going to have, it's just going to say new game. And then let's specify that this is going to be, the type is going to be button. And the class is going to be once again btn primary. Now, of course, we need to do something with this button, right? When it clicked, it has to execute some code. So let's go ahead and define that code as a function in our code section just down here. After uninitialized, we're going to define a new method. It's going to be private void create game. Here we're just going to say navigation manager dot navigate to, and then we're going to go into /game, which, as you remember, /game is the route that we have defined for our edit game page, right? So we're going to navigate into /game. And then, of course, we have to invoke this function from that button. So we'll go again, once again, up into the button declaration, and we're going to say onClick equals create game, which is a function we just created. And that should be it really for what we want to do. So let's go ahead and run the application once again. Let's go back into the browser. Let's refresh this. And sure enough, we now have our new game button showing up right there. And if we click on it, we are taken into the new game page, which is what we wanted. So this is great. And then one more slight detail that we should include in this edit game here, now that we are here, is just a cancel button, right? So because what if the user doesn't want to actually save, but just want to go back into the home page, we should have some cancel button over here. And that's very straightforward to add actually. So let's go back here. Let's stop the server. Let's go back into edit game. And what we're going to do is first define what's going to be the behavior when the cancel button is clicked. So what we want to do is just really go back again to the home page. So we're going to define a method here. Let me scroll down a little bit more. It's going to be just private void cancel. And all we're going to do is just do the same navigation that we do with handle submit. But this time we're not going to be saving anything that the user has been typing in the form, right? We just navigate back into home. And now where are we going to invoke this method from? So for that one, we want to add a brand new button. So just after the declaration of our submit button, we're going to declare yet another button. So I'll just copy this actually. Let's copy that and let's add a brand new line here, paste. Now this button is not going to be of type submit, it's going to be of type just button, right? So this, you can only have one submit button in the form, but the styling is also going to change. This is not going to be the button primary, it's going to be button secondary. The text is going to read as cancel, right? So cancel. And then we want to do something at the onClick event here. So we will say at onClick. What we want to do is to invoke the cancel method that we just created. Let's see how this behaves. Let's run the application and then let's go back here. We will just refresh the page. And as you can see, we now have a cancel button right here. There's our cancel button. And if I click on that one, it will take us back into the home page, which is what we want. Now let's go back into our brand new page for creating a game. And one thing that we're missing still here is for a way for users to not just have to enter the genre like this, right? What we want is to have a way for them to select the genre from a pre-made list of genres. Let's see how we can modify this UI here so that this turns from a text box into a selection, a drop-down selection over here. Let's go back into Visual Studio Code. Now stop this and I'll close that. And let's scroll up a little bit until we see the section where we have the genre, which is this section over here, right? So what we're going to do is to change things a little bit so that instead of using an input text element over here, we're going to change this into an InputSelect. And we will change that there. So this is an InputSelect now, which means that we can add options to it so that the user can select from them. So, but we also want to change this from for control into form select, and then we'll open a section here, and here we can specify all of those options. So all you have to do is really say option, and then there's going to be a value. And so let's say that the first value is going to be our fighting category, right? So it's going to be fighting. So that's going to be the value, and the actual text that displays when somebody selects that value is going to be the same thing, right? So fighting. And so just like this, we can introduce a bunch of other options for the different genres that we're going to support for our games. So I'm going to add, I think that's too much, maybe 3 more options. And then this second one is going to be kids and family. Okay, kids and family on the right side. And then the next one is going to be racing. The next one is going to be role-playing. And then let's actually add one more at the bottom for sports. Sports right there. Okay, and that will be all of the genres that we're going to support in this UI. Now, one more thing that we may want to add here is the default value for this, because when the user just comes into the page, he may have, he will not have selected anything just yet, right? So we want to specify a value for that situation. So that's going to be the very first one that we're going to add here, which is going to have a value of nothing. It's just empty. And we're going to say here, select genre, all right? And that should be it. So let's go ahead and run this and see how that looks. So I'll just do .NET run once again, and let's go back into the page over here. We're going to refresh this, And notice that now we have our drop-down list right there. So now the user can come and select among any of these items. So in fact, let me just go back, let me do cancel, and let's go ahead and do new game now. And let's say that we want to add Minecraft. And this is going to be now kids and family. Let's say that the price is 44, and let's just keep that release date. I'll hit save. And as you can see, now we have a Minecraft with the brand new genre of kids and family added into our collection. So with that, our edit form is pretty much ready, but I think we're still missing something. So let's go back into new game over here and notice the following. What happens if I just don't enter anything here and I just hit on save, right? So hit save, and then what happens? Well, we now have a very empty row over here, which makes no sense at all, right? What we're missing here is, of course, some sort of validation in that form to make sure that the user has to enter the data that we expect them to enter. And so let's see how we can add that validation in our code to make sure that this doesn't happen. So let's go back into the code over here, and I'll stop my server. And what we're going to do, instead of starting with the EditGame.Razor page over here, what we're going to do is actually go back into remember our model, our game model over here. What we want to do is to use validation attributes directly in this model page, so that any component that binds into this class, into the objects of this class, automatically acquires those validation behaviors that should be applied for this class. So for instance, let's say that for the name, so let's go with the name first. What we want to do is to make sure that the name has to be required, right? So to make sure that that happens, what you can do is just add an attribute here called required, like that. And for that, I'll just step there and I'll do control dot. We want to import system component model.data annotations. Okay, and so that will import the required namespace. Now, sometimes this just doesn't work for some reason. I'll try a second time, and if it doesn't work, yeah, we can do this manually. So what I'll do is I'll go to the top, and then we will do using system.component model.data annotations. All right, so it happens in time. And that will make sure that the name has to be there. But not just that, we can require that the name has to have some specific length. So for that, you can use another data attribute here called string length. So with string length, you can specify that the length should not have, like, let's say that the name for a game should not be more than 50 characters, right? That should be good enough for a game. And just like we can do this, we can do the same thing for the other attributes, right? So I'm going to copy this, and then the next one where we want to require things is going to be in genre. So genre is going to be similar. It is required. It doesn't have to be that long. So let's say it should be just a 20, should be good enough. It doesn't really matter that much anyways, because the user has to select it. But anyways, let's make sure we have this restriction in place. The next one is going to be for the price. We should not have games that can cost so much, be incredibly expensive, right? So let's say this is going to be a range. So we are only going to allow values that go from $1 to $100. And so this will prevent the case where somebody enters a negative number or even 0 for the price, and the price cannot be more than 100. That will take care of the validations by using these data annotations. But we also have to do a small change in EditGame.Razor here to make sure that the edit form itself shows some visual indicator. There are some validation errors here, right? So it's not just about making sure that the class prevents the invalid inputs, but also to show some sort of indicator in the UI. So to do that, we're going to do a couple of things. So first, just under edit form, we're going to enter here two things. The first one is going to be data annotations validator. Okay, and we can just close that there so that we get some visual indicator in any fields that don't have the appropriate values. And then we also want to add a validation summary so that we get kind of you're going to see this is a little bit of a summary of all of the validations that are not succeeding at any given time. The next thing we're going to do is to do a small change in this method here. OnSubmit should not be just onSubmit. So if we now want to make sure that the form cannot be submitted unless all validations are passing, we want to be very specific about this. So instead of using onSubmit, what we're going to do is onValidSubmit. So now onValidSubmit will make sure that if there's any validation errors, the form will not be submitted to the server. Let's go ahead and see how this goes. So I'll do Ctrl J, let's start our application once again, and let's go back into our page over here. I'll just refresh to get rid of that line over there. So I'll click on New Game now. Let's see what happens if I try to just save this form now. So I'll click on Save. Notice this. Now we are being prompted for entering the values for the invalid elements, right? So notice that we have a red indicator across all of these 3 fields because the validations are not succeeding. And also we have the validation summary at the top over here that clearly tells us what is missing here. Now I know that I do have to enter a name here. So that's going to be, let's say, Minecraft. Okay, and that will satisfy the first validation. But also notice that if I just enter a long name, so let's say I do this Minecraft a bunch of times. Now this too much too much text, and now we also have the other validation there saying, hey, the name cannot be more than 50. So that is great. Let's clean that up. So that is satisfied. We have to select a genre, and the genre is failing because the default value is an empty string. As you remember, go back here. The default value for the genre is an empty string right here, empty. Okay, so that is why it is failing right now. So we do have to select something. So let's select, it's going to be kids and family. So that satisfies the second validation. And for the last one, let's try a negative number. Let's see, -4. That still is not going to satisfy it because it has to be between 1 and 100. Okay, so we can also not do 150. That's not going to work. But let's say that for Minecraft, good number is going to be, let's say 1499. Okay, that's going to be, and that is a good value. And so now we are able to go ahead and hit save, and that will take us over here. So unless all of the validations passes, you will not be able to submit that form and move on with the flow. So we now have some very nice client-side validations, even way before we start talking about anything about the server side, where we should also do some validations in the backend, of course. But with this, we even avoid that trip, and it's a very nice experience for the users. And with that in place, let's now look into what is that we will have to do in order to enable an editing experience, right? So now we want to change, let's say, the price or something about the name of the game or something else, right? So what is that we will have to do in order to enable an editing experience? So for that, let's go back into Visual Studio Code over here, and I'm going to Ctrl+C and stop my server. And what we're going to do is first we're going to modify our game client, this game client class over here, so that we have a method that allows us to modify a game in the list. And after doing that, we're going to go back into our edit game page, and we're going to see how to use it, not just for creation of games, but also for editing games. So first thing we're going to do is to introduce a brand new function here. This is going to be first a function that allows us to retrieve one of the games based on their ID. Create here public static game, get game. And so we're going to be passing in the ID. And let's actually scroll down a bit over here, get game. And so what we're going to do is the following. We're going to say return. And then from our games collection, our games list, we're going to be using the find method. Okay, so just find. And this method allows us to provide predicate, right? That where we can specify how is that we're going to find the game within that collection. So for that, we're going to be introducing kind of a lambda function here. It looks like this, lambda or arrow function. And then here for each game, we're going to compare the ID of the game with the ID that we received as a parameter. So this means that for this games collection, where we're going to have all the games, go ahead and find and check for each of the games, check their ID, right? And compare it with the ID that has been specified. If it matches, then we found our game. Otherwise, we will not find it. The thing about this function is that, as you can see, it could return a null. And once again, we are warned by the compiler saying, hey, this could return null. And you're saying that you're going to return a game object here, which is not going to be nullable, right? So you may run into a null reference exception once again. So how can we avoid that? Well, in this case, let's do something very simple. We're going to say the following. So if it is null, and we're going to be using this operator here, double question mark, which means do the following if this expression returns a null. We're also going to throw an exception, really. So throw new exception, and we're going to put some simple message here that's going to say could not find game. And so that's one of the ways that you can deal with these possible null references, right? So this way, if we don't find the game, we will for sure get return an exception that says could not find the game, as opposed to just a simple null object that could cause trouble to the calling method. And now that we have this getGame method, we can move forward with the next method. So let me keep going down here, which we're going to be calling UpdateGame. So public static void UpdateGame. Okay, and so here we're going to be receiving the new payload or the new data for the game that just got updated in the UI. It's updated game. And here we're going to do a couple of things. So the first thing is going to be, we need to find the game that we need to modify in the current collection of games, right? So we're going to say, okay, so game, existing game is going to be we just call the GetGame function, the one that we just created up there. We say getGame, and so UpdateGame.id. So it will go ahead, it will invoke this method here, find the game, hopefully it finds it, otherwise it will draw an exception. And then after that, we'll just update all of the properties of that game. So we're going to say existing game.name is going to be UpdatedGame.name. And just like that, we're going to be doing the same thing for each of the properties. So we do genre, UpdatedGame.genre, and then existing game.price, UpdatedGame.price, and then existing game.release date is UpdatedGame.release date. And that's it. With this method, this will go ahead and modify the game in our collection with the new data that has been provided by our Blazor component and by the user. Okay, so now we have to go back into our edit game page over here, and we're going to be performing a few modifications so that this page can be actually used for editing a game. So we'll start from the top. The first thing that we have to do here is to introduce a new route for this page so that it can be loaded based on the ID of a specific game, right? So the idea is that you go from the home page and you click on one of the games in the list and you arrive into this page. But for that, we need to be passing in some identifier of that game so that we can work with that identifier in this page. So for that, we need to introduce a new directive at the very top. Is another page directive that's going to start with /game, but it also has to have another piece here, which is going to be the ID. So that's going to be the ID, and you have to specify also what is going to be the type. In this case, the type is an int, it's just a simple integer, right? So that will allow us to nicely navigate into this page when we do have the ID of the game to modify. If not, then it's going to be just a page to create a brand new game. Now, in order to receive this ID that we have specified here, we need to define or what we know as a parameter into these Blazor components. So I'm going to scroll down here, as you can see, into the code section, and we're going to be making a few changes into this code section so that we can work with the ID of the game that has been received. So first thing, we are going to declare at the top one variable is going to be just public int, and this is going to be ID, and it's just going to have a getter and a setter. Okay, it's kind of a public property. It has this question mark here because it is a nullable property, right? It may not have a value when we just construct this Blazor component. Later on, there will be a value when the parameter is set by Blazor, but initially it just doesn't have any value. Now, this is a parameter, and to make it a parameter, you do have to specify one attribute here, which is called just parameter. Okay, so that instructs the Blazor infrastructure that ID that was forwarded at the very top here, you see this ID over here, has to be assigned into the parameter over here, right? This ID that is right there. The next thing is that we are not going to just define our initial game like this anymore, because we may need to actually retrieve an existing game for the edit case, right? So this will not make too much sense anymore, at least not in all cases. Before actually changing this variable here, we're going to define a brand new method, and I'll do that just right here, which is called onParametersSet. So protected override void onParametersSet. So this is the method that is invoked automatically by the Blazor infrastructure as soon as those parameters arrive from the calling Blazor component, right? So when those parameters arrive, this method will be called. And so this is your opportunity to do something about those parameters. And so here's what we're going to do. So if the ID parameter is not null, right, which means that there's another component that passes in the ID into this component here, we should be able to find that game and assign it as our game variable here. To do that, we're going to do the following. We'll just say game, this is the found game, equals our game client. And remember that now we have a getGame function. So we can just say getGame, and then we will say ID.value. Since it is a nullable int, it does have a value property that you can use to retrieve the actual value of that variable. And the next thing that we want to do here is to actually not just assign that found game into our game variable over here, but instead what we want to do is to construct a brand new copy of that variable. And we're going to be doing that because if we just took this variable here and assigned it directly as the game variable, and since this one is bound into the form, that means that whatever the user types in the form right away as he's editing, that will be immediately transferred into our games collection, right? Regardless of if the user clicked saved or cancel or whatever he clicks, that will just immediately be transferred into the collection. Now we don't want that. We want to give the user the chance of say save or cancel, right? So because of that, we're going to be creating a copy of the game as opposed to just grabbing the game directly from the collection. So now we're going to say then game equals new, and here we're going to be transferring the values, right? We'll say ID equals foundGame.id, name equals foundGame.name, and then genre. We do the price and release date. Okay, let's close that. So that will do it for the case where we are able to find the game, right? Because it exists, this is an edited scenario. But if we're not able to find the game, it means that we are creating a brand new one. So what we're going to do is just say else. Okay, and so let me scroll down a bit. Here is the case where we actually want to do what we're doing already. So preparing the object for a brand new game. We are going to be copying, this section here. We will copy that down here. So game equals new with name, genre as string empty, and the release date as just UTC now. And now that we have this, we can go ahead and change finally our game variable, the one that's declared right here. We can change it so that we don't initialize it right there on construction. Instead of that, we're going to just say that this is just a game variable, game field right there. And yes, it can be nullable. So we will just say add the question mark to make this a nullable property. It will be initialized by onParameterSet depending on if we get an ID or not. And so now that we did that, next thing that we want to do is to properly handle the case of the submit, right? When the game is submitted, what do we do about that? So let's go down here, and here we are in handle submit. So here we're going to introduce a little bit of a new logic here. So we're going to say if the game.id equals 0, okay, it means that this is going to be a brand new game. All right, so we're going to be putting that over here. Now, of course, this is complaining so far, again, because game could be nullable, right? But at this point, we do know that it cannot be null because either we found it or we didn't found it and we created a brand new instance in onParameterSet. So it just can't be null at this point when we do submit. So because of that, what we can do is use this exclamation mark over there, which is what we know as a null forgiving operator, where we are saying that, hey, compiler, I know that you think that this could be null, but I know that it will not be null. It just can't be null because I have structured the code in this way. Okay, so notice that really the compiler, all this is trying to do is make sure that we don't run into a situation where we just do .id and this was null and then this is a null reference exception, right? We don't want to fall into that, but that cannot be the case over here. Now we do an else, of course, and in this else, what we want to do is just say game client dot update game. Here's where we use our brand new update game method, right? Where we pass in the game. Yeah, that should be pretty much it, what we need to do in order to update our game. So let's see if we can do this and see this working in action, right? Let me just go up a little bit and see if we have something going on here. So there's a warning over there. And this makes sense. Yeah, it's complaining about game being null because just like in the index form, when we enter the component, the game could be null. So we don't want to run into a situation there, right? We're going to actually do the same thing that we did in index. Remember that we do have this if else block over here in index. I'm going to copy that. And we're going to go back here and just at the top, I'm going to be saying that in this case, it is not games, it's just game. So if game is null, we will just say loading. And otherwise, we include our entire section of HTML right there for the form, right? So that should handle that case and we should not have that situation anymore. So the game is just fine, it's as a nullable. So let's go ahead and do Ctrl-J and let's do .NET Run and let's see how this page behaves now. So let's go into the page over here. And then the interesting thing, of course, is that we don't have a way to go from one of the items here and just go and directly edit that. We do know that we can go into game, right, for a new experience, and the new experience looks good still. So in this case, we do want to edit an existing game, right? So I'm just going to click on cancel, and we do know that we have IDs 1, 2, and 3. So what I'm going to do is go into game, and then I'm going to add the ID of, let's say, 1. So I'll hit enter. And now we are editing the item number 1 in the collection. You see, game 1. That's a new route that we added to the component. As you can see, it was able to load Street Fighter, fighting, and the price and all that stuff. And that worked just fine. And what I want to do now is just make a small change. So let's say that the price changed. It became just cheaper out of nowhere. So this is going to be now, let's say $15.99. And then I'm going to hit on save. And as you can see, Street Fighter is now a cheaper game. We have $15.99. So the value was properly updated into the collection, yeah, our updated scenario is working properly. So far, we still need to do a couple of things in there, but seems like the logic is working properly. That is great. Now there's one more thing. If we go back into that page here where we were editing Street Fighter, notice that the title still says new game, right? And that's not ideal. We want to do something else, right? We want to reflect the fact that we are editing and not just creating a new game all the time. So let's go back over here, and I'm going to close that. What we're going to do is to introduce a variable for the title. So the title, you know, there's a title here, there's a title there, and instead of being static, we want to turn it into a variable that changes depending on if we are creating a brand new game or editing an existing one. For that, we're going to go down into our code section once again, and just going to introduce a private string title. Okay, we will initialize it with just string empty. It's an empty string, but depending on what happens on parameter set, we're going to set a different value for it. In this case, when the game is found, it exists, what we want to do is the following. Title equals, and so here what we can do is just what we know as a string interpolation, where we can type a string, but also insert here the value of some variable. So we can do edit, and then we will do curly braces, and we will say game.name. So with that, the value of the name property of game will be inserted into the string here that says edit, right? So you should read edit Street Fighter or edit Final Fantasy 14 or whatever it is. And that is going to be for the edit scenario. And then for the new scenario, the new game scenario, we will just say title equals, and then let's just grab that string that we have over there at the top and just copy that. Oops, sorry, going back here, we will say just new game. And now that we have this, we can take advantage of the title variable to place that as part of our page title. So now we don't have to do this. We can just use add title like that. And we can do the same thing over here, add title. So now the title is dynamic. Let's see how that goes. So .NET Run. Okay, going back into the page. And now this time, if I just refresh this, notice that it says, yeah, edit Street Fighter 2. If instead I just remove this, it will just say new game, which is expected, right? I will say edit game 2, and now it says edit Final Fantasy 14, and it's all loading right there. So this is working great. And then of course, what we want to do now is to make the changes required in this page, in the home page, so that we can actually click on one of these rows and go into the edit experience for that one item. Now, doing this is actually very straightforward, so let me show you what we have to do for this. It's actually not very complicated. So let's stop the server there, and let's go back into index.razor over here. And first, what we're going to do is to create a brand new function over here. So here we have uninitialized, we have create game. Let's add a new function that's going to be called edit game, private void edit game. Okay, and so this is going to receive the ID. And all we're going to do here is actually the same thing that we do for create game. So I'll just copy that over here. But we're going to append the ID of the current game, the one that has been selected in the respective row. So again, we're going to be using string interpolation. So we can combine things in this string between actual just text like that. And then we can insert, we'll say game / and then ID. Where we're going to be using this, well, that's going to happen if we go up over here in our table. Remember that we left just one th here and one td here. So that's going to be the place where we're going to be placing a couple of buttons, one for editing and one for deletion. So let's go for the edit case now. What we want to add here is just, well, one more button, like I said. So this is going to be a button where the class is going to be button primary. And then, as we know, we have to say that on click event, we want to go ahead and execute some C# function. And what we want to do here is to specify the function, like I said, that is going to do the editing, which is edit game. And the way to specify that in this case is going to be by specifying this expression like parentheses, and then we do kind of an arrow function like this, and then we can say edit game with the game.id parameter. Okay, remember that here we are cycling across games, right? So for each game, we go and render this. So each row has knowledge of the specific game. So what we do here is we say, okay, so in this portion here, in the onClick, we will be using that game for that row and pass in the ID into the edit game function. All that we're missing here is, well, some text, some actual text for the button. But what we can do here is, instead of just putting text, we can be a little bit more graphical here. As we saw at the beginning, we do have the ability to use something else here in www. If you go to CSS, you will notice that the OpenIconic set of fonts have been actually made available for us over here. And so OpenIconic includes multiple fonts that you can use right away in your code here. And if you want to know more about OpenIconic, what you can do is just go to this page over here. In icon sets, iconify.design/OI for OpenIconic, you're going to find that this gives you a list of all the available icons that you can use in your page, which are like fonts, but they just render as icons like that. So this is a nice way to introduce a little bit of graphics into your page. For instance, in this case, what we'd like to do is to use kind of a pencil as the icon for editing. So what I'm going to do is just type here pencil. You can see there's a pencil in there. I'll click on that, and then this will give us an idea of how to show this in our page. Now, it will not tell you exactly what is the syntax. I don't know why, or maybe I'm not doing something right here, but this will give you the hint of how to use it. It says OI and then colon pencil. So let me copy that. And now let's go back over here. Let me collapse this. So what you want to do in order to use that OpenIconic is the following. So we will introduce an I element here, and then for the class, we're going to be using OI, and then I'm going to paste what I just copied, but it is not colon that you want to use here. It is actually a dash. So that's the syntax that you need to use here. Okay, and maybe I'll send this to the next line. Hopefully that will render well. Okay, for the button and the TD. Okay, so that's how things should look like. That should allow us to show a button with a nice graph over there. And with that in place, we should be able to see our button in action. So let's do .NET run. And let's go back into our page once again. Over here, let's refresh it. And as you can see, now we have our pencil showing up right there. Okay, and so it's a nice way to display graphs, like I said. And if you click on one of those, it should take us, as you can see, it takes us directly into the page to edit that specific game. So for instance, like I said, Street Fighter, now it's going to be even cheaper. It's going to be just $9.99. I'll hit save. And as you can see, that price was updated. Let's say that FIFA 23, let's go over there. And let's change the release date because we made a mistake. It was not September 27. Let's say it was September the 1st. And the price is also on sale. So it's going to go for $29.99, a great deal. So I'll hit save. And as you can see, that was updated, right? Both the date and the price. So things are working great. And so now we have a fully implemented edit capability in our Blazor application. Next in the list is our delete experience. And there's a few ways to implement this, but the experience that I like most is the one where you have a button in the row for the item to delete. Then you click the button, it opens up a dialog, and then in that dialog you have buttons for either confirming the deletion or canceling the deletion. And if you confirm it, the dialog just goes away and then the item disappears from the list. And so let's see what we have to do to enable that. The first thing is going to be, let's go back to VS Code, Control C over here. Let's go back into our game client. And by the way, let me just close this game here. We're not going to be using that. And as you would expect, we just need one more method here that's going to be able to perform the deletion. So to do that, let's add here, and let me scroll down so we can see better. There, public static void delete game. And then what we're going to receive here is just the ID of the game to delete. Yeah, we just have to do two things here. First, let's find that game. So we'll say game equals GetGame. That's our other function where we can retrieve a game. And then we can say games.remove, the remove function of the games list. And then we pass in the game that we want to remove. That's pretty much it. We find the game and then we just go ahead and remove the game. So that's the easy part. Now what we want to do is to define some sort of UI for that delete game dialog. But before we can add that UI, one thing that we are missing here is a small JavaScript library, which is actually part of Bootstrap. So this is the Bootstrap JavaScript library that for some reason is not included right now in our index page. So index.html over here, you see that we include the CSS right there. So that's great. And we do include the JavaScript for Blazor WebAssembly, but we are not including the JavaScript for Bootstrap for some reason. And so what we have to do is just include that here because otherwise we are not able to trigger the effect to show the dialogues. And so what JavaScript we have to include here, and don't worry, we're not going to be writing any JavaScript. We do need to include that JavaScript here. So let me go back into the Bootstrap page. Remember, this is the page where I showed you, where there's all information about Bootstrap. And so what you want to do here is just go back into getting started. introduction, right? So this is the start of the page. And this will explain how to add Bootstrap into your application if you didn't have it at all to start with. And what you want to do is just copy this section here. You see it says bundle and it has a script right here. What we want to do is just copy that. So I'll click on the copy button over here. So copy and then minimize this. And then we will just add it as a next line just after the Blazor WebAssembly.js. We'll paste that, and that will make sure that all of the JavaScript of Bootstrap is included now in our application, which is great. The next thing that we want to do is to, of course, add our brand new component. And we will do that in a very similar way as we did with our EditGame page. So let me collapse all of these things. You know, we have EditGame and index. So what we want to do is just open our terminal. Okay, let me clean this. And perhaps let me expand this a bit. Just like we did before, we will say .NET new Blazor component. The name is going to be delete game. And again, we want to output that into our pages directory, right? So I'll hit enter. And as you can see, we do have a delete game component over there now. So close that and let's go into delete game. So here we are in delete game. Now the shape that we want to specify for this component, like I said, is a dialog, right? And so defining a dialog with Bootstrap requires a bunch of styles that luckily we don't have to actually do this from scratch. We can actually go from an existing example that the documentation offers. So if you just go back into the page over here, we're going to be looking into the section for components, and then let's look for modal. Yep, modal right here. And so this is going to give you all the information about how to define modal dialogues like the one that we need over here. So let me scroll down a bit. Scroll down. Let's look at this live demo over here. This will show us kind of an example of what we need. So what I'm going to do is just to grab this div over here, okay, from the live model, and then we will just go from there, right? So copy this. And we're just going to paste it right at the very top there, okay, overriding that H3 that was right there. So let's go ahead and change a few things here. So first, this one says example model for the ID. So perhaps I'll do Control H and let's replace this with delete model. Okay, so let's replace all instances with delete model. And then as you can see, so there's a div for the dialog, another div for the content. Then we have a header and a body over here, and then even a footer. Then in the header, we do have a title that we're going to change very soon. And then we do have a button to close this model on the top right. There's going to be an X to close the model. And then there are a couple of buttons here, one for just closing, well, like canceling. And then there's another button for actually, in this case, saving changes or execute the actual action, which in our case is going to be the delete action. So we're going to go ahead and just change these buttons so that the first one says, instead of close, it's going to be cancel. And then the other one is going to be delete. Now we need to write a little bit of C# code to bring this component to life, right? So we're going to have to do a few things here. So let's go down into the code section now. Okay, the code section at the bottom. And the first thing we're going to do is work a little bit on the title. So we need to display a proper title so that the user knows what exactly is that we're going to be deleting. But in order to do that, we're going to be needing one important thing, which is the game, a game object, so that we know what is that we're going to be deleting. So we're going to define here a property. So prop game, which is going to be again nullable, and then we'll just name it game. Okay, and of course we need to add the corresponding namespace. So I'll do control dot here. We will say using models, and this has to be a parameter. This is going to come from the index page in this case. So for that, we're going to be defining this as parameter. You can send not just scalar values, but you can say send an entire, in this case, an entire game object if you wanted to, into this page. And with this, we also want to specify another variable here, which is going to be the title. So it's going to be just a private variable here, private string title. And we will initialize this with string.empty. Now we're going to define our onParametersSet method. Remember that we used that before. So we will say protected override void onParametersSet. Like I said, this is the method that executes when the parameters arrive. And we're going to do the following. We will say that the title is going to be, again, an expression like this. It's going to say delete, and then we interpolate the value of game, okay, dot name. And we will say question mark there. We're asking the question, I mean, do you want to delete this game? And in this case, again, it is warning us about the possibility of a null reference. In this case, what we can do is just use a question mark here to say, hey, try to get a value from game.name, but if it happens to be that a game is null, well, you will not be able to return anything. It's just going to have an empty string here. Now this should never really happen because we are supposed to get the game as a parameter into this dialog. So we should always have it available. And so it should be fine, right? But with this, we avoid that warning. The next thing is going to be, of course, we have to now make use of this title, right? So now let's go back into the model itself, and let's add the proper title, which is going to be here. Remember, here's where we have the model title. Now we can say add title, right? So now we have a dynamic title. It should always display the name of the game to delete. And next, what we want to do is to provide some behavior for these two buttons that we have here. And so perhaps so we can read better, let me just send this to the next line. So let's do it like this. Otherwise, it's just too much going on here. Okay, so that is one button, and then we have the other button over here. What we're going to do for the first button, for the cancel button, we are going to invoke a cancel method. And in fact, let's actually write that cancel method first. So let me go down here, and after onParameters set, what we're going to do is define two methods. One of those methods is going to be our private void confirm method. This is a method that we're going to be using to specify that the user actually confirmed the deletion, right? Now, interestingly, we are not going to be doing the deletion of the game in this dialog. This dialog is just going to capture the intent of the user, but the deletion is going to happen back in the index page, okay? So how are we going to communicate from this component back into the other component? Well, here's where we can use another type of parameter that is called a callback. Right? And so how does that work? So what we're going to do is just to define here, a variable here is going to be, again, kind of a property, but this is going to be of type event callback, of type bool in this case, all right? And we're going to be naming this one just on close, okay? And again, this is defined as a parameter. And so our index page is going to refer, or it's going to be able to have access to this onClose callback in such a way that we can invoke the callback from this component, and the other component, the index page, is going to be able to do something about it whenever we invoke the callback. Now, since this callback is if of Boolean type, we have the ability to send either a true or a false when we invoke it. And that's what we're going to do right here when we go into the confirm method down here. We're going to do the following. So let me scroll down a bit. We're going to say that since the user is confirming the deletion, we will say just onClose, and then we say invoke async, and then we will say true. Okay, that's going to trigger a signal back into the index page saying that yes, the user wants to delete the game. And just like this, I'm actually going to copy this. I'm going to add another function down here that is going to be named cancel. And then, as you would expect, this is going to send false. And so these are the two functions that we are going to be referencing from our buttons. So if we go back down here where we have the buttons, and let's take these things down so we can read better. Let's see, down here. Okay, so we have canceled, and then we have the primary. And so for the cancel case, we're going to be invoking onClick method, and that is just going to invoke the cancel method that we just defined, right? So on click for the cancel invokes cancel, and then for the delete button, we'll do the same thing, but in this case, it's going to invoke confirm. And I think that's pretty much what we have to do to implement this one delete in dialog. But of course, it will not make much sense to define this guy without defining the corresponding logic in the index page so that it can invoke this. So we cannot really see much about this dialog until we define the logic in the index page. Let's go back into index.blazor, and let's go down into our code section here where we're going to be defining a couple of things. And so the first thing is going to be a variable that's going to keep track of what is the current game. So the game that the user selected for deletion. So this is going to be just private game. And so this is a nullable current game that will keep track of the current game. We'll see how in a moment. But before doing that, let's actually go down here and let's define what is going to be the function that's going to be performing the actual deletion of the game. So here we're going to be saying private void on delete modal close, okay, and bool accepted. So the intention is that this accepted variable is going to have either true or false depending on if the user confirmed it or not. If accepted, If accepted, then what we want to do is something as simple as game client dot delete game, and then we will pass in the current game and then dot ID. Okay, of course, this is going to complain once again because current game is a nullable, but via the logic that we're going to be defining in a moment, we will know that this will have a value. So I'm going to be using the null forgiving operator right there, and so that way we don't get that warning anymore. Just so that things become fresh in the page, in the index page, just after deleting the element, what we're going to do is just say games equals client.get games. Okay, so that will go ahead and give us the fresh list of games so that we can render that in our table. Now let's see how to make use of this method here and the variable that we just defined. So for that, let's go up into our HTML section over here. What we're going to do is just on top of the table, we're going to be defining that Blazor component for the dialog, right? Because we created the component, but we have not referenced it anywhere just yet. So that we're going to do right here on top of the table, delete game. Okay, so this is our delete game component, the one that we created over there. And then we're going to be defining a few things here. First thing is that, as you remember, there is a parameter that we have to specify for this one, which is the game, right? The parameter game. How do we define that parameter? Well, if we go to index.blazor, what we can do is just say game equals current game. So that's going to be our way to pass the value of the current game into our delete dialog. And then the next thing is going to be the onClose. Remember that we also have this parameter onClose right here, this parameter close. We're going to be defining that as onClose. We're going to define our onDelete modal close method, right? The method that we just defined it down here. OnDelete modal close. Maybe perhaps I'll just copy that and just paste it there to avoid typos right there. And so that is how we can define our delete game component. Now don't worry, because this component, since it is a model, it is not going to just show on top of a table right away when we load the page. We do need to execute some action via Bootstrap so that the dialog actually shows up. And that's what we're going to do now via the brand new button that we're going to introduce. So remember that we do have a button right here for the editing, right? So we're going to be following a similar idea for the deletion. So I'm going to actually just copy this button. I'll copy that, and I'm going to be adding, perhaps let's move this to the next line so it reads better. And I'll do that over there. So now we have a second button over here. So let's do the right thing for this button so that it becomes our delete button. First thing, that this is going to be of type button danger, another style available via Bootstrap. The next thing is that on click, we are not going to be invoking edit game, but instead we're just going to be adding a little bit of C# code right here, which is all it's going to say is that current game equals game. Okay, remember that we have this current game variable available, and what we want to do is just keep track of what is the game that the user clicked on, so that later on we know which game to delete, right? So, and that this is one way how you can do that, right? Remember that this is the row has a reference to the game, and that's how we can keep track of it. The next thing is going to be that, of course, we don't want to be using the pencil also here. OpenIconic also provides other styles. And you can look at all those styles in the page that I showed a moment ago, but the style we're going to be using here is just the X, or the font, I guess, that we're going to be using is just the X, like that. And so this is going to show as an X button there for deletion. So that's all good. However, we do have to do one more thing here, because the opening and closing, well, actually the opening of the dialog happens by using a few of other attributes that we have to put into our little button over here, which are provided again by Bootstrap, right? And you can get all the information on the Bootstrap page. But what we have to do here is the following. We're going to say data bs toggle is going to say model. Okay, and perhaps I'll just send this to the next line so we can see better. Okay, so just like that and like this. Okay, so that's one. And then the next one is called data bs target equals. And then here you're expected to specify a selector for the identifier of your model. So if you go back into our delete game component over here, and if we scroll up, remember that the ID of our component or of our model is just delete model. So what you want to do there is just copy this name, delete model, go back into index, and specify that for data vs target, you want to do pound delete model. Okay,
That means that when we click this button, it is going to go ahead and toggle the modal that's represented by delete modal over here. And that's what's going to actually trigger the opening of the modal itself, right? There's nothing else that's going to trigger that opening. And so if we have done everything well, and hopefully we did, this should be good enough for us to do the delete experience. So let's go back into our page. So I'm just going to Control C this, I'll do .NET run once again. And let's go back into our page over here. Let's do a refresh. And as you can see, now we have our delete button available right there, right? Is the pencil with the, it's the open iconic font with the X. And then if we click it, as you can see, we do get the dialog for, in this case, deleting the Street Fighter game. And as you can see, the title is correct, and we have our two buttons over here. But one thing that I forgot is actually that we don't actually have a body for this model. So let's fix that quickly. Let me just close this. We can fix that very quickly. So I'll do Control C here. All we have to do is just go to deletegame.razor. In our model, remember we have this model body over here that we are not going to be using because it's a very simple confirmation dialog, so we don't want to use it. So we just have a header and a footer. So I'll save that. And then we are going to go ahead and do .NET run once again. And then let's go back into our page, refresh it. And then we're going to say, okay, so click on delete. So do you want to delete Street Fighter 2? Okay, so let's see what happens if we just cancel this. I'll say cancel, and well, nothing happens. So that's good. Now let's say that we do want to delete it. So I click on that, and then I'll click on delete. And that indeed deleted the item. As you can see down here, there is no item, but the model was not removed. And that was, I guess, because of a small other mistake that I made. So let me just go back here quickly, and I think I know what's missing here. So in delete game, if we see our model, one thing that we're missing is that in the case of cancel, we're doing the data bs dismiss attribute that's right there, but we're not using that attribute for the primary button over here for delete. We should be using that. So I'm just pasting it right here, as you can see, and that should take care of that one issue. So let's run it once again, and let's try this one more time. So I'll refresh this. And so let's say we want to delete Street Fighter, click on here, delete Street Fighter 2. Yes, let's go ahead and delete it. And there you go. The game has been deleted, right? It does not exist anymore into the collection of games. You want to delete one more, FIFA 23, click on delete, and it is gone. So as you can see, at this point, we have a fully functional Blazor UI with operations for listing games, creating games, editing games, and even deleting games. Congratulations, you made it till the end. I really hope the course met your expectations and helped you get started with Blazor WebAssembly. However, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you'd like to go beyond what you learned here and become a full-stack developer, you'll need to dive into a few other topics like how to create the server-side or backend component of your app in the form of a web API server, how to integrate the client and server to see the application working end-to-end, how to use Entity Framework Core and SQL Server Database to be able to persist the data used across the application, and perhaps how to implement a search feature across both the backend and frontend. To cover all these topics, I created my ASP.NET Core for Beginners course, which expands what you saw in this course with dozens of additional lessons that will teach you step by step how to add all the essential components of a complete ASP.NET Core full-stack application. If you're interested, please check out the links below this video to get all the details. I hope this was useful, and please let me know in the comments how you feel about Blazor and if you think it's a good option for your coming projects. Consider liking this video if you find it useful, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you're the first to know whenever I publish new videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.